Okay, everyone, we're ready to start. First, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Professor Keith Thurgood. He's a director, healthcare management, UTD. And moving forward, we have our panel for healthcare supply chain. We have Sean Clinton, Senior VP Supply Chain, Texas Health Resources. Sean has extensive, yes. Sean has extensive experience adapting to ever-changing marketplace and in-depth knowledge of specialized supply chains. For the last 11 years, he has been working with Texas Health Resources, which is the largest faith-based non-profit health system in the United States. Then we have Pahi Chaudhary, Senior Manager, Healthcare Advisor, PwC. Pahi has over 13 years of experience in supply chain in the Oracle e-business suite and cloud module. She has led 7 successful end-to-end challenging multi-year cross-vendor, cross-functional global transformation projects. Her experience spans across the healthcare provider, medtech, telemedicine, pharma life sciences space, and consumer and industrial products. Her core expertise is within the procure to pay and inventory management space. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Just a point of clarification, you're probably wondering why I have these in my ears. I'm not listening to James Taylor or the Beatles. I lost my hearing about 2 weeks ago, and it's only back about 20% right now. So I didn't want to make Ramesh feel bad and dump him at the last second here. So I've got these earpods in, and I've hooked it to my iPhone, so I think I can hear everything. And as I was telling some of the other students, it's hard for me to modulate my volume. So I hope that it's okay. If it's not, yeah, give me the thumbs up or the thumbs down or whatever.
Quit yelling at me.
I'm sure most of my students appreciate the fact that I can't hear a word that they're saying. It's also helpful at home when my wife asks me to do something. So again, welcome to this forum, this panel. I'm really happy to have Sean and Pahi with me. You heard a little about Sean. Sean has lots of experience in the healthcare space, specifically with supply chain. He works for Texas Health Resources, which in the healthcare space is one of our big systems here in Texas. So we look forward to hearing from him and his comments. And this, of course, Pahi, we look forward to hearing from her. She's got deep experience working with Oracle. And I couldn't hear if this was said in the introduction, but both Sean and Pahi are practitioners. So it's one thing to understand the theory and why supply chain is so important, but it's another thing to execute it. And Pahi has some great experience. She's actually led a series of global transformation projects where she had to integrate everything that she was thinking about. So happy to hear that. So before we get started, let me tell you how we're going to do the panel. We're going to talk about 3 broad areas: policy, operations, and trends and risk. We'll also give Sean and Pahi a chance to talk a little bit at the very beginning about what they're thinking about, their insights, and then we'll move into some questions. And then at the end, we'll leave some time for Q&A for you as well. Before I let Sean and Pahi talk, I wanted to share just a couple of data points with you about the healthcare system. Now, how many of you go to the doctor? How many of you buy stuff at Amazon? How many of you believe that shipping is free at Amazon? Good, all right? So you're supply chain folks. There's no free shipping at Amazon. There's no such thing as free healthcare. Somebody pays for it along the value chain. And whether it's taxes or the individual mandate that we had early on with the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, costs are embedded in the system. There's no such thing as paying for your deductible and then getting free healthcare. That all comes back to you in a higher premium the next year or the year after. couple of other data points for you. Every year in the United States, there are 100,000 people that die in our hospitals. There's some studies that suggest it's twice as high. That's the same as a 747 crashing in the United States every 3 days. Now, you would think if we had an airplane crashing every 3 days in the United States, it would be all hands on deck to figure out what we were doing. But we haven't gotten that far yet in healthcare. We understand the problem, but like many organizations, getting things done and changing in healthcare can be a little bit problematic. Point number 2, we spend in the United States $4 trillion in healthcare. $4 trillion. In the United States, the average cost per capita is around $12,000. That $12,000 is twice the average of other westernized countries across the world, where it's closer to $6,000. So we're spending twice as much, including everything we're doing in the supply chain. But here's the other data point. Our healthcare outcomes are no better than the country of Georgia or Slovenia. So twice as much with middle of the road outcomes. What's wrong with that picture? Makes no sense. And then one last data point for you to think about. Our healthcare system, the $4 trillion, this represents nearly 20% of our GDP every year. Nearly 17 million people are involved in the healthcare industry. It is massive. And if you think about healthcare, most people think about it in terms of a hospital. But inside the hospital or inside an integrated delivery network, there are all kinds of jobs, including supply chain and supply chain management, which plays a very important role in how we deliver healthcare and how we make our healthcare system as efficient and as effective as we possibly can. And that's why you have these two experts here, because that's what they do every single day. So Sean, I'll turn it over to you to provide a few insights. Sorry about that. Did I talk too loud? Okay, were you sleeping? He was sleeping. That's what it was. And then Pa, he will go to you. Okay, go ahead.
Let me check first. Can you guys hear me without the microphone, or do you want me to use the microphone? You guys can hear me okay? Good. I despise those things. So thank you very much, Keith. Keith is right. Some of the points he made are exactly what we're looking at for efficiency's sake inside the healthcare supply chain. I will tell you, about 2.5 years ago, we were undergoing a massive ERP transformation project. And my focus was on that. And then something happened. I don't know what pulled my focus off of that, but something happened in March of 2020 that took my focus a different way.
Yeah, what was that?
I don't know. And so for the last 2.5 years, I've really had to take a long look at what we did with our ERP and how that translates into the future when we look at a resilient supply chain. In the past, I was most concerned with taking cost out of the system. And I will tell you that all of my peers and I look back now and say, we kind of did this to ourselves. We looked to save pennies on commodities and really screwed up the supply chain for the last 30 years. So when you hear me talk about onshoring stuff, onshoring manufacturing, that is not because I want to put a fence up around this country. It's because in the supply chain, the shorter the supply chain and the more straight line I have to that transparency, the better it is for everybody, the more resilient I can build it. I'll talk some later about where the future is going when it comes to data in the supply chain, and it's pretty spectacular in every industry but healthcare. There is absolutely no transparency in healthcare. It's $4 trillion because it's middlemen on top of middlemen on top of middlemen in the healthcare supply chain. and it's maddening. It's maddening. So if I seem to get angry at some point, that's why. Either that or because Keith's yelling at me for some reason. But I will tell you, I have done this for 30 years. I continually learn new stuff. I am always fascinated by it. And so hopefully, after I get done with this, you guys go, wow, healthcare supply chain, that's my career path. So that's what I got for you.
Good, thanks, Sean. Pahi, over to you.
I might need this.
Hello. Okay. So I would like to start with, there was a question in the previous session. I think everybody keeps pointing to you, but there was a question in the previous session on how do we bridge the gap between technology and process. PwC here. So that's how I would like to definitely plug in. So basically, this is where we come in, right? So we understand the processes, the changing demands, and at the same time, we understand the technology. So the technology that I am specializing in is Oracle. You guys heard SAP from the previous speaker, but Oracle is a similar product. It's an ERP product that basically integrates different platforms, and it helps in addressing some of the problems that Sean talked about, right? Post-pandemic, my observations match what Sean was saying, that healthcare and supply chain always had issues, but the pandemic just exposed them, right? So it now is a focus of every client for PwC in the healthcare space, where they want to make supply chain process more transparent, more resilient, and ensure that they are prepared for the next pandemic or a war or any kind of, to avoid the disruption that can be caused by any such event in future. And how can technology help with that? So it's like a marriage, right? Because you have to ensure that you change your processes, right? Like the previous speaker said. So there has to be a change in process as well as an adoption of new technology. And only when there is a perfect blend between the two can you hope to achieve robust supply chain, or a supply chain which is transparent and resilient, right? So that's it. And any questions after the session, please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or something, but yeah.
Thank you very much, Pahi. So let's jump into some questions now for our panels. We're going to start first with operations and then move into trends and risk. And if we have time, we'll ask some policy questions. But when I think about operations, I think it's fair to say that in most healthcare organizations, there are some roadblocks, some of which Pahi mentioned and some of which Sean mentioned, around transparency, visibility. How do you use this data to drive operational excellence? So Sean, I'll start with you and I'll ask the same question to you, Pahi. So here's the first question. When you think about healthcare and the healthcare supply chain, what do you think the three biggest challenges are, and how do we address those?
Only three.
Yeah.
Yeah, only three. I know. I feel your pain.
Well, so I'll start with the first. You're going to hear probably Pahi and I talk a lot about transparency. That's the biggest challenge in the healthcare supply chain, is I can go back probably 2 levels to understand who is supplying who before it gets to me. Beyond that, it's extraordinarily hard. There are some tools coming online now that will help. But even if I can go all the way back to that tier N supplier and understand that's where the supply chain starts for a given product or a given raw material, I have no idea what the output capabilities are all along that chain. So for me to understand that, I can then make sure I create the right demand signals for these folks, that I'm not going to screw up the supply chain. That's what happened in the last 2.5 years. My demand signals were insane, and now we are trying to work our way out of that. The problem is, I don't know how far back my demand signals screwed things up, and so that is going to be the next 18 to 24 months of my life, is trying to figure out how far back did I screw things up for those 2.5 years, and how can I start making that right again. I do love to blame manufacturers for stuff, but I will tell you, I'm as much to blame for what the healthcare supply chain looks like today as these manufacturers are. They made horrible decisions, And I, in turn, compounded those horrible decisions, not because I panicked, but because we had volume like we've never seen before rolling through our health system. And so you try to plan ahead for that, right? You don't know what's coming next. And for a while with COVID, it looked like we were going to do this for the rest of my career. And by the way, the rest of my career would have been much shorter if we kept doing this. But that's really challenge number one, is transparency all the way back to that tier end supplier. Challenge number two, pricing in healthcare makes no sense whatsoever. Pricing and contracting in healthcare makes no sense, never has. So I talked about middlemen all the way down. It's true. Keith and I know this, both worked for GPOs in the past, group purchasing organizations. So that's a middleman. My distributor is a middleman. Typically, who you might consider a manufacturer in the healthcare supply chain is not the manufacturer. They contract that manufacturing out and put their label on it. So I've got another middleman to deal with. So again, talk about the transparency thing. That causes pricing to make no sense whatsoever. I've had suppliers approach me now saying they need to give me, like they're giving me a gift, 25 to 30% price increases. But they can't tell me why. They use generic terms like freight or labor, but they have absolute, and I'm like, no. I mean, if you guys pay attention, the cost of moving a container across the Pacific has halved in the last 2 months. And when I go back to them and say, okay, so we can take that out of the equation now, they're like, well, no, not quite yet. And here's why. There's no detail behind price in the healthcare supply chain at all. It's not related to reality. It's not related to what I actually get reimbursed for delivering patient care. So that's the other thing. The third challenge is technology. I will tell you that when it comes to clinical technology, where we are at Texas Health, and I will tell you most large integrated delivery networks around the country, cutting edge. This is cutting edge stuff out there. The problem is the operational technology to back that up is lagging tremendously. It's been like that forever. The focus has been on clinical technology. As a person who's had that clinical technology used on them, I'm fine with that. But now we really need that operational technology to catch up, and we need that supply chain technology to catch up in a big way and quickly. So those are three. I could go on, but
Okay, Pahi, and maybe you can weave into your deep expertise in things like procure to pay, inventory visibility, telemedicine, that kind of thing.
Right. So, because it sounds repetitive because it is true, right? Because this is what the biggest challenge is, to bring supply chain resilience and to prevent disruption. How many of you saw the 2014 TED Talk that Bill Gates did on the potential pandemic, right? If you haven't, please watch that, because this was something that, using analytics, he was able to predict that is going to hit the country. But nobody took it seriously, right? But now that we've been hit with it, now every client that we have, especially within the provider space, they want to plan, what they need, what they need to source, by having something called a pandemic stock. That pandemic stock doesn't mean that they are just planning for a pandemic, but means any kind of disruption, be it a war or anything. So while they were very lean earlier, like Sean was mentioning, it was all about the lean supply chain, about lowering costs. Now it is about making sure that there is enough inventory to deal with the next possible disruption, right? So want to definitely leave you with that buzzword, the pandemic stock. And how do you do that, right? That's by enabling technology, right? A product like Oracle, which has a planning tool where once you feed in the demand signal, it automatically provides recommendations, based on patterns, based on previous consumption. You can actually build recommendations and create requisitions and basically source your material accurately, right? So you're neither oversourcing nor undersourcing, because you're actually using a product and a tool to do your planning as well as your sourcing. The second thing I want to talk about is, the second challenge is how to make your supply chain more resilient. So resiliency cannot be built with over dependence on just one source of supply. So again, a trend that we are seeing on how people are dealing with it is going from a procure to pay model to a source to pay model, where you're not just buying material or not just having strategic relationships with one vendor, but maybe multiple vendors, and they might be geographically apart, so that in case there is a natural calamity that hits one of the vendors, your supply chain doesn't just break, right? Like what happened when China went through all the lockdown, right? The supply chain just broke because there was so much dependency on, you know, manufacturers sitting in China. And then now people are diversifying and trying to have manufacturing bases everywhere, right? So think of it like basically diversifying your sources and, making your supply chain more robust consequently. And the third thing I want to talk about, which is very relevant to the current project that I am in, is supply chain should be very flexible and adaptable, right? Because think of it this way, that the company, the client that I'm working with right now is into telemedicine. So when the pandemic struck, right, everybody wanted to explore telemedicine. Nobody wanted to go to a hospital because people were afraid of catching an infection, right? But now the pandemic, people are getting used to the pandemic. The pandemic severity has lowered, so they have to reinvent, right? They can't just be in telemedicine. So now they are providing in-home patient care as well for chronic care like diabetes and high blood pressure. And that is actually, instead of services, from a services model, they have gone to actually providing goods to people, right? And how do you enable that? By having new processes within your supply chain enabled by technology, right? So yeah, that's it.
If I can jump
Yeah,
in real
Yeah.
quick. So something she said is really important in my world too. To diversify the supply chain is vitally important, but think about this. If I offer 50% of my business to one person and 50% of my business to somebody else to diversify my supply chain, will I get the best price from either one? I won't, right? So that's the constant balancing act that has to occur now when you're doing sourcing work, even when you're doing supply chain operations work. Because you have to understand those two people, one, are going to enter your supply chain different ways, and it's going to cost you two different things to do that, and it's not going to be cheap from either one. So you have to ask yourself, is this critical enough that I'm willing to pay the extra money and change my operation enough that I have two sources for this product?
So Pahi, let's build on what you just described here a little bit when it comes to inventory. So whether it's an S&OP process or CPFR, here's the question. Is just-in-time inventory still a viable operational paradigm?
I think in a way it is still just in time, because it means that you hold but the definition has changed widely, right? Like it's no longer that your need has changed, I would say. Your need was earlier in terms of, thinking that you needed, a particular level of inventory, and that level has changed, right? In like I love to bring up a phrase that my boss coined. It's not just in time, it's just in case. So he loves saying that. And one day I was like, what is just in case? And he's like, I just came up with it. And I was like, yeah, but please elaborate. But yeah, just in case is essentially that you are planning for the next disruption. So, right, just in case the next disruption happens. So that's we need to make sure that it is still that you're not carrying inventory for a very long period of time, but you're planning at higher levels. So while you thought that you needed, say 100, you're now planning for 100 plus whatever your pandemic stock is. So
Sean, do you have a point of view?
I actually do. So let me ask, I'm sorry I don't know this, Ramesh. Is the Toyota Way part of the curriculum?
Sure.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure. So, it was part of my graduate school curriculum was the Toyota Way, and I'd read it before then. And when I'm in healthcare, I have to tell you, we are not rolling Camrys off the line, okay? So it's just in time is very easy when you know tomorrow you're going to make 100 Camrys and they're coming off the line. The human body is the most complex machine ever built. if I could predict who was going to show up with what illness in my care locations, I'd be a very wealthy man and I wouldn't have this job. And so just in time, to Pahi's point, means something very, very different in healthcare. And I think sometimes people get caught up in that, saying we are just in time. And no, your boss, I know her boss extremely well. He did not come up with that. But just in case is a very good way to describe what healthcare supply chain is and well-run healthcare supply chains.
So to build on that, Sean, in healthcare, we have something called provider preference items, right? So this is a physician that has a very specific need for a heart valve. And there may be 20 heart valves, but that physician wants that heart valve. How do you deal with that?
I ignore it. No. That actually brings up a great point, Keith. I'm glad you brought this up. Very different than other healthcare. I'm not the end user of any of these products, right? I am a support function in my health system. And products like this, people say preference items, right? Typically they associate that with physicians, but I have had people get mad at me over the type of alcohol prep pad I have brought into the health system. So those are little things they use when they're ready before you get inoculated. People have gotten mad at me over the type of alcohol prep pad I brought in. For physicians, understand that typically when they go through school and do their residency, they are trained on a very specific brand of product, and they are very comfortable using that brand of product. So they will always say, I want this. The thing is, over time, all products that are preferenced become commodities, and you have to be able to explain to your stakeholders, it has now reached that tipping point where it is a commodity, and you have to do it in a very nice way when we're talking about physicians, to be perfectly honest with you. And that's the delicate balance that exists out there. One thing that has become a commodity, at least I will say for us, that I never thought would see happen, are stents, heart stents, that are implanted in hearts. Over time, these have become very commoditized. They're much cheaper than they used to be. And most of our physicians now will agree that even though they weren't trained on this one actually works the exact same way. There is no peer-reviewed literature that says one is better than the other like there used to be 25 years ago. So I think over time, and I've always said, if it comes in a box, it will succumb to commoditization at some point in time. Now, I may not be alive to see everything get to that point, but it will. But that's another wrinkle in the healthcare supply chain, so thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and before I understood healthcare, when I went to the physician's office and I was with my kids, I would always grab one of the gloves and blow it up. But now I know there's a cost associated with that, so I don't do that anymore. So, Pahi, to build on this, how important is it to integrate various stakeholders in the supply chain and supply chain decision making? Thinking about preference items as an example.
I mean, I don't have a specific example around preference items, but when Sean was talking, then it reminded me of a kind of a memory, because anybody over here who has been to the OR, I mean, hope not, but I had the misfortune of going there, and essentially, before they administer the drug, they tell you that, hey, I'm going to give you propofol, and that's how, I don't know if you guys are aware, but that's how Michael Jackson died, right? I mean, please Google that if you are not aware. So I was like, oh my God, like, do I have a choice of going for another drug and not propofol? And she was like, this is the hospital policy. This is what we are going to give you. So that was my experience around that. But about clinical integrations, I will definitely say that's a topic very close to my heart, because that's where we come in as technology enablers, because we help to integrate, think of it like, where is your consumption happening? For example, in an OR, right? Your consumption is happening there, right? And where is the person who is planning for that? He's geographically sitting somewhere else, right? He has a system in his hand. He needs to plan based on what is being consumed. And if those two systems are not integrated, where you don't have visibility, the planner does not have the visibility on what is being consumed, then how does he plan effectively, right? So integration in that sense is really important, because you need to make sure that your consumption, your place where your consumption is happening, or your system where your consumption is happening, is linked to your ERP system, so you can do effective demand planning, right? Otherwise, your planning will be insufficient, right? And the other place is, if I take it just outside of supply chain for a second, the integrations also facilitate how much do you really need to charge. Like, it helps you to understand how much you need to charge to your customers or your patients for the services that have been provided by the hospital to them, right? So it helps integrate all of these systems, front and back office, and that's why I think that clinical, because at the end of the day, you're spending the money in supply chain so you can make a revenue, right, out of it. So everything is integrated, and that's where we come in as technology enablers, and that's what I think the importance of clinical integrations are.
Sean, any comments on that?
Yeah, it really does go back to, how do we tie all these things together? And so that's why I'm glad this is kind of technology-based. I know we're talking a lot about healthcare and the healthcare supply chain, but it really does come back to starting to tie together a bunch of disparate systems that exist inside of healthcare. There's the clinical systems, and then there's the operational systems, and those things have to talk. They absolutely have to talk. So a lot of times you'll see manufacturing systems manage some of that supply chain. We're not so fortunate. We have probably, I would tell you, at least the things that are impacting my supply chain at Texas Health, there's probably 25 different systems that impact the supply chain at Texas Health. And it's understanding all those touch points into that ERP that we actually use to source product and move product throughout the system. So how does that impact occur?
Sean, I want to come back to something you said earlier when you talked about the 3 challenges in healthcare. You talked about transparency and pricing specifically, and some of the hidden costs. Can you describe some of the things that are embedded or hidden in the cost, whether it's an outbound shipment or an inbound shipment, and by the way, I don't know if they mentioned this as well, he's responsible for about $1 billion worth of purchases as well. So he's always balancing the idea, I can get a lower cost, but I might get eaten up in the inbound cost, might cover it,
Yeah.
right? So give us a flavor for
I'm
that.
always stunned when I hear it, like out loud, $1 billion, right? It's a big number, but it's certainly not the biggest in healthcare in the United States. A lot of the hidden costs, I think it was great that you asked how many people think Amazon ships stuff for free, right? There's that freight cost a lot of times in there. There's a tremendous amount of labor cost associated with the supply chain. I think that's all buried inside of there too. But because I deal with middlemen, what's buried inside of there is the fact that I am also paying for sales reps that I don't want to talk to. I'm paying for sales managers that I don't want to talk to. I'm talking, regional vice presidents are buried in there. So we look at companies all the time. We look at their financials all the time. I'm not going to name the company, but we looked at one the other day that has 80% gross margin, which is crazy, right? Any business would kill for 80% gross margin in healthcare. And they spend 5 times as much on general and administrative costs as they do on their supply chain operation, which is crazy. So most of the buried cost I'm paying for is administrative labor that, quite honestly, I want nothing to do with. And when these people talk to me, do you think they know anything about their supply chain? They have no clue. And so my goal really for my team, my sourcing team, is don't talk to the sales representative, find out who their operations representative is, and talk to them so that we can better understand peer-to-peer what's happening in the supply chain. And they are going down that path. It's very difficult, but every other industry does that. The operations and supply chain folks talk to the operations and supply chain folks at the end of the line. That does not happen in healthcare at all. So we're working on that. Oh, I'm sorry. I keep ignoring this side of the room, guys. I apologize. Not on purpose. I guess I'm left dominant today. So that's
Keith is sitting on this side.
that's true. I have to talk really loud so Keith hears me and kind of directly at him. So yeah, that's really where the hidden cost is in healthcare. There's a bunch of labor on my side that has to move stuff around, but man, that labor cost is nothing compared to the labor costs that exist trying to sell me stuff. So.
Thanks. Pahi, and you work with PwC. Have you experienced this? Do you have a point of view, data points?
I would say that one of the trends we've been seeing is that of self-distribution. I don't know if you guys do that, Sean, at THR, but basically we're noticing some of the provider space clients go towards owning their own fleet and their own transportation, and essentially kind of eliminate the middlemen, like you were saying, and kind of connect directly to the manufacturer and kind of basically eliminate the number of layers in between the manufacturer and providing in-home care, maybe to, like the example for my client who provides in-home care for chronic care patients at home. So we're seeing a lot of trends around self-distribution, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, you bet. So it didn't have my background on my bio. So I'll tell you, for a lot of my career, for almost 18 years of my career, I worked for Cardinal Healthcare, doing logistics consulting, e-business consulting, that sort of thing. And if you're not familiar with Cardinal Healthcare, one of the largest distributors, one of the largest companies in the United States and across the globe. But they are a huge distributor of both pharmaceuticals and medical supplies. And I always swore that if I got out of Cardinal Healthcare, I would never get into distribution. Never in a million years. So the pandemic came along and I was forced into distribution a little bit because I wanted to take control of the supply chain on critical items, probably about 30 critical PPE items. And I did that and got into distribution, but it's a very temporary type thing. Where I'm spending my money is investing in domestic manufacturing as opposed to distribution. I have the blessing of geography here in North Texas. Many of my major manufacturers are either based here or have large offices here. I am surrounded by huge distribution companies here in town. I mean, from Amazon to Cardinal to Owens & Minor, players in healthcare. So I don't think I want to spend money on distribution. I will spend money on making sure, to her point, having that resiliency stock. But I don't know that I want to run a full-blown distribution outfit. What I'd rather do is spend Texas Health's money on investing in domestic onshore manufacturing. That's actually what we've done. So we'll continue down that path. I think that's the better way for me to go, just based on where I am. I have peers that run supply chain and health systems in South Dakota. They are huge, spread out. Self-distribution makes a little bit more sense for them than it does for me.
Good. Let's transition now to trends and risk. And I want to share a data point with you. In a recent study, I actually think it was by PwC, now I think about it, but I might be wrong. There are at least 30,000 websites that get hacked every single day. So if you think about the denial of service attacks, you think about the importance of securing the supply chain, and you think about some emerging trends. So think about wearables in the healthcare space. I now have an Apple Watch. I have something that's monitoring my glucose and my heartbeat and on and on and on. Pahi, what is your sense on how do we protect the healthcare supply chain system given some of these emerging trends going forward? What are your thoughts on that?
So some of the things that we have seen, and by no means I'm a risk expert over here, but I will tell you based on, because PwC in general provides services across the board, like risk as well as operational implementations. But one thing which we have seen which is really helpful, is training, because healthcare industry is very susceptible to phishing, right? And this is where we need to make sure that people understand what could be an attack, like a potential attack. And this is something that regularly needs to be reinforced through training. So nobody leaves their passwords lying loose, because imagine the wealth of data that exists in healthcare and how much sensitive information that there is about patient history and what that could be worth if that data is sold, right? And what's the cost if you are under attack to not respond to that attack, right? Because it's not like you can take forever to respond to if you are under attack, right? A cyber attack. So it's a question of life and death in healthcare, right? So you need to make sure that you respond quickly and prevent such things from happening. And one of the things which, apart from investing in stronger firewalls, etc., is actually to train your employees to make sure that they understand the risk of maybe a phishing email, never share their user IDs, passwords, etc., to sensitive databases with anybody. But that's what we have seen.
And Sean, from a THR perspective, it's a big healthcare system in North Texas.
Yeah, so we do have, I'm going to get his title wrong, but we do have a Chief Information Services Security Officer. I think that's his exact title. That probably is awake 24/7, worried about this sort of thing. I will tell you, my personal feeling is similar to actual durable goods moving through a supply chain. The less steps you have to take there and the less information it takes back and forth to make that happen efficiently, the same should exist around healthcare information, rolling through, IoT stuff, rolling through these wearables. The least amount of information that can get passed to get the job done is what we have to do. I think too often in healthcare, we try to kill a fly with a sledgehammer, whether it's in the supply chain or with these wearables and the amount of information that goes back and forth. So
Yeah, great point.
I have a point. Just to follow up on that, because I think this is important to think all around, right? So I wanted to say that also the privacy around information and keeping it in a system only when it's required, right? Meaning to say that you have to have an electronic health record somewhere, but when you are trying to process a payment or when you're trying to process a receivables invoice, do you really need that data? So think about, does that data really need to leave that system for any downstream activity, and otherwise just keep it contained to where it is right now and don't make it travel through multiple systems where there may be a chance of it. So that's why when we do Oracle implementations, we actually have internal audit and external audit teams who make sure that we're actually not keeping sensitive information where it does not need to be, right? Okay, just wanted to add that.
Well, let's hope that we continue to secure the supply chain, because as you said, in many instances, it can be a matter of life and death for some of these devices. And they're very, very expensive, so you have to manage inventory as well. On that theme, both of you mentioned earlier the importance of technology as a key enabler to drive excellence. What are your thoughts on big data, the use of big data, and more specifically, predictive analytics, as opposed to lagging data points?
yeah.
Go ahead, Sean.
If you don't mind. Big data. So common term, right? We all hear. So I think what we have to understand is there is a tremendous amount of data available around the supply chain. The problem is that it exists many different places. For example, one of the things that I'm trying to get my head wrapped around is there's UN trade data. So anything that crosses international borders generates data. So I'm trying to get my head around this because last year they generated 80 million records of data. So once I find that out, then I need to find out where the manufacturing locations are of my, say, top 30 suppliers. Then I gotta start matching that up. Then I gotta take that over and over again until I get to that tier N supplier, right, the end of the road. Somebody, my vice president of sourcing that works for me, said, I don't think it's a straight line. I think we're gonna end up in this big circle and just come right back to the beginning. I said, please don't say that. Do not say that. We gotta find the end of the line somewhere. But this is the amount of data that I'm talking about. And we're gonna have to apply AI to go through this and start making some correlations. We're gonna have to do machine learning. Predictive analytics, you're absolutely right. They call them black swan events because no one can predict them, right? But there are other things that happen in the supply chain that cause issues. what are those leading indicators? I typically find out, this is on a good day, 2 weeks before I'm going to be out of something. That's on a good day. 2 weeks, we're not going to be able to ship this to you in 2 weeks. We have got to really back that up, quite honestly, to about 3 months. I need leading indicators to tell me 3 months from now, you're going to suffer a hiccup. Because in healthcare, if I'm going to be out of something, I either need to find a substitute, which could require clinical training to operate that substitute or use that substitute, or I need to change clinical practice. And that usually takes 60 to 90 days. I don't get that time now. We are desperately trying to find out operational and financial leading indicators to tell us something's going to goof up in the supply chain. We think we're getting close, and if we do this, it's obviously going to be freeware for everybody. It's a zero-sum game, because once we do this, if my peers and others come to the same conclusion at once, we all basically have to stack hands and say, we're not going to panic. If we know something's going to happen in 3 months, we can't panic. Because at the beginning of the pandemic, I will tell you, everybody panicked. I'd like to think I didn't, but I had some sleepless nights. I was fortunate enough, like I said, they already have some domestic manufacturing partners. So I wasn't too worried about stuff coming across the ocean. I was worried about their manufacturing coming down with COVID. So I think that's the big thing here. When we talk about big data, it is huge data that is generated in the supply chain, not just the healthcare supply chain, in the supply chain. And the ability for us to narrow that down to what's important is really, it's going to take me through the rest of my career. It's that simple.
Any experience from?
I think it was really, I agree with Sean, because though we don't deal so much with AI, but essentially the importance of AI is one of the emerging trends that we are seeing, because we have all the data, like Sean said, but the AI will help to bring logical conclusions from there, right? It's something that I would say that I do agree with Sean on that, and nothing further to add from my end.
Good. We'll leave you with one last question then, since we're running out of time. And you alluded to this earlier. So if I think about the increased focus on patient-centered home healthcare,
Yes.
what is the role of the supply chain in that last mile delivery?
So I would say that there is not the uniqueness, because 3PL, 4PL, and all of that have always been in existence. But I would say the uniqueness over there is willingness to have new business processes. Like my current client, they were completely into telemedicine and they moved to in-home patient care, and then they had to get into drop shipment and making sure that the fastest way to get the supplies to the fastest way to get the supplies to the patients was by eliminating the middlemen and having the supplier ship the goods directly to them, right? When you go to the Amazon website, do you see that some of them, it says that shipped directly by so and so? If you guys notice that, then that's nothing but drop shipment, where it's not coming from an Amazon warehouse, but it's coming from the supplier, right, directly. So this is the exact same thing where my client, they decided that the best way that their supply chain can support that revenue model is by doing drop shipment. So
Very good. Well, do we have time for questions now, or no? Do we do? Okay. So first I want to thank Sean and Pahi, geez, brain cramp, Pahi, for participating in the panel today. And just so you know, I'm just finishing up listening to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, one of the great Beatles, just kidding you. Okay, let's turn it over to some questions.
it's like everybody points at you for questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bring it.
Do I need a mic? I just talk. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
All right. There's a little bit of context for this question, I guess. So I grew up in Qatar, and if anyone knows anything about natural gas, Qatar provides 25% approximately of the world's helium supply. Helium is really important in MRIs and CTs. So when there was a blockade placed on our trade, you had MRIs in hospitals in Washington that had just become glorified fridge magnets, like $400,000 fridge magnets. You can't run an MRI without the helium. So one solution that I've kind of heard of for the supplier risk is analyzing the supplier risk and trying to indirectly mitigate that. In healthcare, do you think it's a healthcare company's responsibility to analyze their supplier's risk to maintain their own supply chain? And do you have any examples of companies doing that?
I do think that they have a responsibility in the healthcare supply chain. Do I think they fulfill that responsibility? No, I don't, not now. Some of them do from the standpoint, and I'll put it this way, distributors do try to mitigate risks. So, but these are not necessarily manufacturers. I do think distributors try to mitigate risk because that's what they're supposed to do for me. Many manufacturers, simply because if they're a publicly traded company, they feel that's proprietary information. They don't want to tell me where they make stuff and how much they can make. So that's where I think they have a responsibility to be a little bit better about it. And you're right, one of the things that happened with that helium as well, that there are derivatives of helium that are used elsewhere in healthcare, and I didn't know about the derivatives. So I'm not a clinician, in case you can't tell. You don't want to come to me for medical advice. But when that happened, we instantly had to pivot and say, oh, now we have these 4 problems, not just one problem. So I would hope that manufacturers would come to me and say, hey, it's not just helium, it's these derivatives as well. Nobody did that. We had to find out when stuff didn't show up on our hospital dock, so.
Pahi, do you have a point of view on
Yeah.
that?
So we do have a solution for it whenever that becomes a priority. So we have used it for other clients, non-healthcare. So essentially we have a collaboration portal wherein you can roll out surveys to your vendors. So it could be done either by the healthcare provider or by the distributor, whoever's priority it is, and to make sure that you're always aware of the risks that the suppliers place, whether it is a supply chain risk or whether it is he got hit by a natural calamity or whatever, if his capacity has suddenly shortened due to whatever reason. So the most effective way, we do have a solution in Oracle, which is to enable the sourcing module and to actually have a portal, collaboration portal, which will enable you to have better coordination with your vendor and avoid and being aware of their risks.
Any other questions?
I have a question. And I think I don't even. So, how difficult is it in the healthcare industry to have competition? Is that another issue where it's difficult because you may only have one manufacturer that produces one medical item, and then you don't have competition to allow you to have a champion challenger model where it's like you can have them kind of compete?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a few what I'll call super tankers in healthcare, and they control the market share on certain products that we absolutely have. We call it every patient, every time. And they make it virtually impossible for competition to enter the market. And not because of what's being produced is hard to produce, it's because a lot of production set up in healthcare is pretty capital intensive. You've got to be able to build these machines to build a little product like this. It's still fairly capital intensive to come into healthcare. And a lot of people will say it's not worth it because so-and-so controls 90% of the market. I doubt I will ever get more than 5% of the market. So I'm just not going to, that's a great question because competition really does help us in the supply chain. But so many times, these super tanker companies just over the years have taken over market share. Very unhealthy markets. It's one of the things, it's actually one of the reasons why we look at investing in onshore manufacturing to create that competition. So I want to build my own stuff.
Pahi, any comments? No?
No further insight.
Okay, we had one other question. This will be our last question.
All right, I had a question. We were talking a lot about the pandemic and there being a lot of solutions made because of that event. I wanted to see if there was too much preparation for trying to figure out what to do if that happens again that would hinder operations currently. And yeah, if that was too much, if there were too many resources that would hinder another supply chain.
Oh.
Go ahead, Pahi.
Well, I don't think that's the case because you're constantly evolving what your demand pattern is going to be. So it's not static. While there we are going to have a safety stock or the pandemic stock, but that's the cost versus benefit analysis, right? The cost of carrying the additional inventory versus the prospect of loss of business. So I wouldn't say it's over preparedness, but it is basically, I would say that earlier the adoption of tech, and these solutions already existed, by the way, but they were not the focus. Adopting these solutions were not the focus for healthcare industry. Like they used to work in different systems, Excel based spreadsheets. They never thought that this would be a requirement where they would need to have a full-fledged technical integration of all their systems. So I would say these are all very positive changes. And obviously you need to do the balancing act between the additional cost versus, the potential of losing customers and, loss of revenue. But I would say this was much needed, and that the pandemic actually exposed that, and, this should have been done earlier is what my feeling is.
Sean, anything?
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna sacrifice one for the other. In fact, now my team understands, not only do they do the sourcing that keeps the lights on, they also do sourcing that builds resiliency into the supply chain. But that's a really good question, because I think, for those who know the history of Texas Health, some of you know what we went through a few years ago, and this isn't COVID related. What we went through for one patient and the absolute unbelievable national panic that occurred because of one patient that showed up at our hospital. I will tell you that actually steeled our nerve when COVID came around. So I'd like to think, now that we've been through this, there'll be even less panic that occurs in the supply chain, and the right preparations and the right demand signals are sent for the next time we have something crazy happen. So.
Very good. Well, I would just close with this. We need great leaders of character and competence in healthcare. We need great leaders of character and competence in the supply chain. So we challenge you as students to be that kind of leader like Pahi and Sean are. And we need you to make a difference in the healthcare space and in the supply chain space. We need you to think critically and be adaptable and agile and develop systems and processes that drive and sustain operational excellence. So thank you, Pahi and Sean, for spending some time with us today.
We have two panelists virtual, and one of them is here. Our moderator is Professor Prakash Srivastav, Clinical Professor, Information Systems, UTD. Then we have first panelist Melissa Amorose, President and Co-founder. Melissa is the founder of Caramasto, an award-winning women-owned enterprise. Carasamo works with leaders in consumer industry to design and develop IoT products. A computer engineer from Georgia Tech, Melissa is a seasoned professional in the field of IoT and digital transformation. Then we have virtually Nathan Cunningham, ex-Tesla CEO of Freelance Consulting. Nathan has managed nearly $1 billion in contracts over the last 8 years through supply chain roles at Tesla and Ingersoll Rand. He's currently a freelance consultant helping companies with data analysis in their supply chain. And then we have Anuradha Panyam, solution consultant, Bristlecone. Anuradha is an experienced business analyst specializing in solving complex supply chain problems through software, proficient in client engagement, root cause analysis, UAT demo. Over the years, Anuradha has been implementing solutions in enterprises like Verizon and Blue Yonder. So, Professor.
Thank you. Greetings all, good afternoon to you. How many of you been in the morning session? Okay, all of you, good. Nice to see you back. How many of you are undergraduates? Some undergraduates, some graduate students, okay. And how many are from supply chain versus ITSS? Everybody supply chain or ITSS also?
Supply chain, supply chain.
So we have a mixed audience here, folks. Let me begin by saying this is an interesting topic, IoT and supply chain. And here is why I say so. Okay. Supply chain is at the top. and IoT is at the bottom. Begins with sensor data, and then think about how do you manage the entire supply chain. To do so, to illustrate all the nuances and idiosyncrasies of that, we have great panels with us. For sourcing, our expert is Nathan. Okay, he has been sourcing a guy with Tesla for a long time. Sourcing is one of the first things you do in supply chain, right? Then product making intelligent products. We have Melissa. That's what she specializes in. Okay. Then what do you do next? Deliver. Delivery expert Anuradha is here. So she will focus on that. Of course, everybody will pitch in as we go along. But the key question is sourcing, making, delivery, returns, sustainability, all those are parts of the fundamental issues in supply chain, right? If you look back, these are the functional aspects. What are the business aspects? Business aspects are cost, speed, quality. Everything from strategic objectives. Strategic objectives are like, hey, what's my return going to be? Okay. How am I going to satisfy my customers? Okay. How am I going to satisfy my shareholders? Now, how do you connect all that at that top level from little connected smart product? So we are hoping that our panelists will provide their insights to make all that connection. So with that, let's begin. So first question we need to level set everybody is, what is IoT? Okay, so let's begin, Melissa, with you, and then everybody can chime in after that. Same question to the panelists. Go ahead.
Great, good afternoon. And can you hear me okay without the microphone, or do you prefer if I use the microphone? It's okay? All right. How many of you think that you know what Internet of Things means? Do you? Yes? No? Nobody knows? Okay, you're a tough crowd. So the Internet of Things is the integration of sensors in everyday physical objects. And as Dr. Prakash was saying, it really starts with electrical engineering and physics, because most of these sensors are picking up analog things, and then we convert them into digital information. And so what these connected products can do for us is that they can empower these artificial intelligence systems that we were talking about in the previous panel, because that's how we collect the data, because the data has to be collected from somewhere. Okay, and the end goal of all of this is, well, like we were discussing, to improve efficiency, to conserve power, to make the processes and businesses better, to automate tasks and things like that. And so for that, we typically start with a product that already exists, and then we add the connectivity piece to it. Okay.
Thank you, Melissa. Nathan?
Yeah, so I'll add a different perspective to it a little bit. I am getting an echo because I'm hearing myself. I don't know if it's possible to change that, but I'm hearing myself. So anyway, okay, so I'll add a different perspective coming from the industrial side of things. So Tesla, I worked in the factory every day for 5.5 years. Ingersoll Rand is a big manufacturing company. So, oftentimes we think of the Internet of Things as, I just installed a Ring doorbell at my house, right? That's the Internet of Things. But on the industrial side, the Internet of Things is trying to increase efficiencies, and it is sensors and electrical engineering and trying to aggregate all of this data, right? But also starting to collect data in a way that makes sense to achieve business objectives. So oftentimes, Internet of Things is this doorbell at my house, but it's also all the sensors in a really intelligent factory of the future.
Thank you, Nathan. Anuradha?
Yes. First of all, I would prefer being called Anu. That's a simple one. Okay, that's fine. Okay, to add the perspective of Internet of Things, again, I'm getting an echo. I'm not sure if you're able to listen to me correctly or not. Um, Before going into Internet of Things, I've seen that there are a couple of people from computers background, and some of them from supply chain, and some of them from masters and different groups here. So I wanted to start with some of the basics of supply chain evolution and how it's the current state of supply chain, and how Internet of Things is actually being used in current supply chain. So before even the concept of supply chain started, there were businesses around, right? Like we had businesses going on, we had people selling stuff, we had people buying stuff and all. But the concept of supply chain has started out with a simple buyer getting things from a sourcer and then selling it to the customer, to a global form now. Initially, when globalization was not there, the businesses were very local businesses. We had suppliers locally available, we had customers locally available, and if I had any issues with my raw materials, I would just go call the customer, call the supplier, or meet up with the supplier and get it resolved. Or if I had any issues with the customers, I would just call them and say, hey, it's getting delayed by 2 days. You will be getting it in 2 days. So it was all local businesses, and uh, the processes were very simple. As machines started coming into picture, the globalization started kicking in, and people started seeing, like Prakash was just mentioning, one of the factors which companies or businesses look out for is the cost factor. And that's what led to globalization again. I have a supplier at my local city who's selling me raw materials for $10, say for example. But I have a supplier somewhere, let's say China. I'm getting the raw materials for $1, including the logistics and everything. If I get my raw materials to my location, it's only cost me $4. So I'm saving about $6 per piece, right? That's again cost benefit. The same thing for customers as well. How we have customers locally available. I'm getting $20 for my finished product. But if it is going across the globe, somewhere a customer in Australia is paying me $50 for the same product. So including the logistics, again, I'm making profit. So people started seeing benefits in expanding their businesses across the globe. And we have different warehouses coming into picture. We have different manufacturing locations coming into picture to accommodate the growth of business. This is all good in terms of profit, as long as they started they didn't observe the difficulties of expanding the business. Because now I have 50 locations across globe, and to manage 50 locations operations is a nightmare if you don't have benefits of applications which are available. And that's where the ERPs come into picture. As the complexity of supply chain increases, we have ERPs which focus on individual process within supply chain. Like we have softwares for planning, we have softwares for transportation management, we have softwares for warehouse management, we have softwares for order management, etc. Like to manage all the different processes within supply chain. And that's really been helpful for many companies, because it makes their life easier. If I have an order coming in, I have it showing up in my order management system. If I have some inventory being stocked out, I have it showing up in my warehouse management system. So it's all good. But again, the problem here is there's so many systems, right? If I take 50 warehouses here and across the world, I have 50 order management systems, 50 warehouse management systems, 50 transport management systems, and to be able to consolidate all that data is a nightmare again. So what is the complexity here? You can see that, right? People are losing the visibility into actual operations which are happening within the supply chain. They have visibility into individual location details, individual process details, but the complete view of a supply chain as a whole is missing. And that's where the companies are looking out for now. They want to understand what is happening with their supply chain. They want to understand what are the complexities with their supply chain, how the issues happening at sourcing are impacting the delivery, how the issues happening in manufacturing are impacting the delivery, are impacting the performance. So that's the current business problem which we're trying to solve. How IoT helps in enabling this is by providing the information which is needed. Like IoT devices, for example, GPS locations. We have GPS coordinates to track the shipments. We have GPS coordinates available with GPS trackers available, which you can associate it with a single product, or for that sake, a container or a truck for that matter, so that you know exactly where your shipment is at that particular time. There are sensors available which you can put it in warehouses to track the temperature of warehouse location, so that there's no temperature breach happening with the warehouse. So it helps in enabling you to visualize the issues and to improve the performance within supply chain. I hope it was good.
Good, Anuradha. Thank you. Anu, sorry. Okay. Let's think about this IoT product a little bit more. How is it made? How is the product made smart? You had a phone, you got smartphone, you got connected phone, right? So we are making, now we just heard supply chain, intelligent supply chain, connected supply chain, right? All the way. So I'd like to pose question to Melissa. Melissa, what do you think how this product is made smart? How do you make this product? Go ahead.
All right, so to give you a little context, and in my company, we've worked in making a lot of products smart. So to give you an example, it's refrigerators, thermostats, light switches, smart locks, toys, baby gear, including cribs, and things like that. So as I was saying earlier, we typically work with manufacturers that already have a product. And so a product, if it has batteries, so we always say, does it have batteries? The answer is yes. Okay, we can make it smart. Because we need to have batteries to be able to have a main CPU that controls something. And so the way we make it smart is we add on top of that a connectivity chip. It could be a Bluetooth chip, or it could be a Wi-Fi chip. And so we first integrate it into the board, and then we design the protocol to talk to the main board, so they're talking, the information is passing through. And then we design the firmware on this connectivity chip, okay? And then we design the protocol communication that will carry the information over the air, okay? And so that information will get to the endpoint, which will be either a mobile phone or a web service that will display on a website. So you could say it's like the cloud or the web, but as Anu was pointing out, there are many systems sometimes, and you may need to have data from another node or another endpoint. So that integration of systems and information, a lot of time is spent there, especially on the cloud. And we call that in some ways DevOps and microservices and things like that. It's a lot of work that happens for this integration, which is not necessarily related to the collection of data, the transferring of data, right? And so for all of this to work in IoT from an engineering perspective, we need a multidisciplinary team of skills, because you need to be able to do embedded firmware, you need to be able to do antenna, radio connectivity, understand protocol design, and then understand mobile application development and web and backend development as well. So as you can see, it's a lot of things, many specialties that these teams have to come together, and collaboration is key, because when you design a smart product, when you develop a smart product, maybe when you guys first approached me, I thought about the supply chain of making an IoT product. And that's completely different than the IoT impact on supply chain, right? And so I'm thinking from the perspective of making an IoT product, and I am one layer of a 30-layer cake, okay? And so that's how much effort goes into making a toy or a thermostat. And I think what people don't know is that to make a smart lock from scratch, if the product didn't exist before, can take you 2.5 years. And so it's a very long time. And if you count the design time, add another year, because we first start with research. And so what we do is usability testing. We gather people, normal people that fit a demographic in terms of age or location on the US and income and things like that. And we start by asking those questions that will lead into the design of a product. So to give you an example, this year one of my clients will be releasing a temperature sensor that is wireless. And the idea for that product came in a user research that we did in Vegas in 2016. So as you can see, it's taking a long time to prototype and to take it to market. Okay?
Thank you. No, we haven't forgotten that part.
Yeah.
You can still, we would still like to hear your idea of the entire supply chain of your business. That's for sure. But let's turn to Nathan. Nathan, in your Tesla example, she gave an example where she's fitting the existing products with the new technology and all of that. In Tesla, when they built their factory or whatever they did they have to retrofit it, or they already got greenfield built-in sensors and all of that, and how did you source them? Would you like to comment on that sourcing experience of yours, please?
Yeah, definitely. So Tesla initially bought the Fremont factory from GM and Toyota. It was a joint ventureship in California. And they ripped out pretty much everything except for the pillars. So all the equipment was brand new. And the reason is because the equipment to manufacture an electric car is different than the equipment needed to manufacture a gasoline vehicle. There are some similarities, especially like tires. Tires are the same, right? But pretty much where the similarities end. You know, it's like there's so many different things. And so, you know, Melissa described IoT as like this layer of this cake with 30 different layers, right? I think of IoT a little bit as like as a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle. And especially in the industrial sense, it's a jigsaw puzzle and you don't know how many pieces there are, because until you start building it, you know, and so you're building it and you're like, oh shoot, I'm now 99% done, and there's this piece of information that I don't have, right? Because I'm not collecting this data. I don't have the right sensor in the right place, right? From a sourcing perspective, typically what we do is we bid out projects to equipment vendors. So we have companies that manufacture equipment. So, for example, probably a good example there's a ton of YouTube videos about it, is we take the individual battery cells. There's about 4,000 cells in one car. So we take a cell from Panasonic and we put it into a frame. It's called a module, right? So there's a robot that picks up those battery cells and goes like that, right? And so what we do is we say, hey, we put out to different vendors and say, hey, we need a robot that picks up a battery cell and puts it into this frame. Here's how big the battery cell is. You know, here's how many battery cells are going to be coming across the manufacturing line every single minute, every single second. Here's the cycle time that we need you to hit in order for us to achieve our production goals. And so we go out and we say, hey, this is what we need, right? And by the way, from an IoT perspective, you know, we need every single step of this process to have every sensor imaginable, right? Because we need to be able to measure all these different things, right? So then those vendors go out and they say, hey, we need sensors, and there's manufacturers of sensors, and there's, you know, dozens and potentially hundreds of different types of sensors, right? And they say, hey, I need 100 of these sensors for this new product. And one of the challenging things for me is sometimes sensors break, right? Especially in a manufacturing environment, you got very heavy things moving around, right? We got robots moving very quickly. Some like accidents happen, right? And so a sensor breaks, and all of a sudden that sensor is supposed to tell me if that part is good or not. It's a quality sensor, right? So now we're out of luck. We're like, oh shoot, like we can't even measure our yield. How do we measure yield? So now we have to like scramble to get a bunch of people to say, hey, we have this manual measurement to that still passes quality checks and everything like that, but it is much slower. And so again, now my job is to source these sensors from these companies to say, hey, I need a replacement. I don't have any. And because we're spending money on operators every day, every minute of every day until we get this replacement sensor installed, right? And I'll add one more layer of complexity to this. There's dozens of different types of vendors, and there's hundreds of different types of manufacturers. So at any given time, I probably had 1,000 different sensors that I was responsible for stocking, right? And I don't know if that's a real number. It could be 500, but nevertheless, there's a very large number of things that like different sensors that I needed to stock. Because any one of them could have broken at any point, right? And so it's a lot of different parts. It's a lot of different types of sensors. They all do very different things. Some things are similar, obviously, but there's a lot of nuances and a lot of complexity to make sure that I have every risk reduction. I have every single sensor in the entire factory covered, right? And it's a lot of sensors. Just go to YouTube and search Tesla factory and just count. Just pause the video at any point in time and count. And there's a ton. And that's not even to go into cables, which cables could break, and then the sensor the cable connects to is useless, right? So anyway, there's all sorts of pieces of the puzzle that you have to make sure are accounted for.
So Nathan, you keep all that inventory information of sensors, broken, working, implemented in some kind of a database. Is that database available to delivery people like Anu can send it to you? She's the delivery expert. Can she touch into your deliveries inventory system and forward truck at appropriate time to, just-in-time inventory or something like that?
So yes and no. Theoretically, yes.
Theoretically, yes. I like that.
Theoretically, yes.
Because that's what people are looking for, is to have that information.
So I'll tell you that when you launch a new factory, you don't know how frequently something's going to break. You don't know the standard failure time of this sensor. I had a sensor that broke every single day, but it wasn't because the sensor was no good. It was because there was a pallet that kept hitting it. And for whatever reason, there was no way the engineering team could fix that mechanical issue. So it's like I had to keep replacing the sensor, even though it was a perfectly good sensor. They just crushed it, right? So, there's sometimes that it's easy to predict, and very early on in the production ramp, you understand what the failure rates are. But I had new parts failing constantly. It had never failed before because it had been 3 years and it was running perfectly for 3 years. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, I don't want to work anymore. And think about every electronic part you have in your house, right? All those chairs you're sitting on. It's like any one of those chairs could fail at any time and you have no idea, right? Don't scare them. Sorry. Your chairs are probably not going to fail. But yeah, it's complex. It takes time to understand the failure rates, but once you do, it is much easier to get just-in-time inventory.
So Nathan, let's say you have some kind of analytics which has a historic record and it can predict what the failure rate might be, and I know you have that information with you. What kind of things can you do with your process information and for the delivery knowing that you have to deliver to Nathan on time?
So that's what I was just saying. When Nathan said theoretically it's possible, and that's what companies are looking out for nowadays, because the lack of visibility is one of the biggest challenges in most of supply chain companies around the globe. Not only supply chain companies, but most of the supply chains for businesses. That's one of the biggest nightmares. Again, I'm using the word again and again, but it is. Because lack of visibility means, like Nathan was just giving an example. He has an issue with sensors, and there's going to be a delay in manufacturing. But he knows that there's going to be a delay in manufacturing, but the downstream impact of what that manufacturing delay is going to do is not, Nathan is not aware of it. And again, many of the supply chain officers are also not aware of it, and that's what they're looking out for. And that's where the concept of digital twin comes into picture, where again, it's a latest trend which is going on, control towers or digital twins, where they want to be able to see the changes happening in the supply chain as and when they happen, like near to real-time replica of real-time processes into the logical instance. And if you have a digital twin for your supply chain, what it would do is, once Nathan identifies that there's a sensor which is broken down, the system is updated with the broken down sensor information, and system, again, it has the ability to suggest where the sensors are available. If it is if you have a supplier nearby, just place an order to the supplier and get it delivered by tomorrow. Or if you don't have, like he was just mentioning, there are 500 suppliers, and he doesn't have to go through all 500 suppliers to see which supplier has the data available or the sensors available. System has that information because the information is loaded into system. Again, it doesn't fetch from anywhere. It has to be connected, it has to be set up. But once you have a digital twin set up for a supply chain, the information is available, and it makes your life easier because you have all the data and information needed to make the decision you need. So he can just order the sensors and get it delivered. If in case the product is not in demand, Tesla is obviously in demand, but in case there's a product which is not in demand, he doesn't have to expedite the shipment. If in case you have a shipment, you have a customer who's a high priority customer who's waiting on that shipment or on that product, you have to expedite the shipment and make sure that you are delivering the process or delivering the shipment items to the customer on time. So the concept of connected systems helps you understand that you are able to make informed decisions. And just now Prakash was again asking, if you have a historical record of such instances happening, will you be able to resolve this? It definitely helps, because if you have a record of all the historical data of such issues which happened, and if you have a record of the solutions which have been proposed for that particular issue, you can just pick from one of the solutions and see whether that works for that particular issue or not. Sometimes the issue may be exact replica, like he said, because the pallet was hitting it and it was failing. That's not something which we can fix. But again, if it is something which is a fixable issue, and if it is repeating it again and again, you don't even have to intervene. There doesn't have to be a manual intervention in between. The system can automatically take care of it. How it helps in the delivery process and warehouse process is, again, an interesting aspect, because once you have the systems available, IoT is, again, like Melissa just mentioned, there are so many different forms of IoT devices. There's sensors which they're going to release, temperature sensors. There's systems connected within warehouse for conveyor belts. Like, say, for example, the typical warehouse processes include picking, packing. You have inbound coming in, outbound going out of the warehouse. So there's a lot of manual intervention which happens throughout the process. Like picking is something which a person does manually. Packing is again a manual process where a person packs the package. And again, it is put into outbound location area where it's picked up for the outbound shipment, where it goes out of the shipment to the customers. It gets delivered to the customers. But if you have a system or if you have a RFID sensor associated with that particular item, and the information is available in the system, I can have an order coming into a warehouse, and based on that order, the system can identify where that item is available. You don't have to manually go and search for that item. The item will be available. It will be brought up to the packer's location. There will be a manual intervention where the packaging has to be done. But after that, we don't have to have any manual intervention. System understands that this item is associated with this packet, and then that packet can be automatically routed to the shipment or to the container where it actually needs to go, because the conveyor belts are again smart conveyor belts which are connected to the system. So it understands which truck needs to associate or which truck needs to have this package. So all this information is available through the devices which are connected in the warehouse. So IoT helps in such a way so that it reduces the manual intervention, reduces the errors which happen through the process, and helps in improving the efficiency.
So there are issues in supply chain, which both our speakers mentioned, Nathan and Anu. You want to add on something before we move to another topic?
Issues or benefits, or
Go ahead, let's talk about the benefits. So we just found out that there are issues with the sensors being broken and how the delivery works and all of that. So let's talk about how those can be solved and what the benefits of IoT. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I am surprised about the failure rates of the sensors, like he was talking about, because that's not really a failure point for us. I think for us the biggest failure point is IT servers being down. That's I believe accounts for more than 85% of supply chain disruptions. Okay, so it's very rare for us for a sensor to break, but I can see how, in the case of Nathan, it leads to longer delivery times, and I myself ordered a Tesla months ago and I still haven't received it. So yeah, something you guys need to work on. But in terms of benefits of IoT, I think that we are that gap, we bridge that gap between manual and digital transformation. And a lot of clients come with that ask, how can I make this more efficient in the warehouse or in the factory at the floor? And so what IoT does is brings that transparency and that visibility, because by gathering this data, you're able to make more informed decisions. And I think by now you could see that a trend from this conference has been this movement from a supply chain that is more predictive instead of reactive, right? And so I think that is where IoT really comes from if you follow the path. How do we get to better insights? And while there is a lot of talk about AI and MLs and all of that stuff, making sense of that data in an intelligent way, there is a long ways to go for that. Like, we are really not where we could be. And definitely it's an emerging trend, and I would say most software engineers today graduate as an AI engineer. That's what they become to work for. Other than that, I think that monitoring storage conditions is very important, and this one is dear to me because I am in the cold chain, and what that means is temperature experts. And I know that around 30 to 40% of I think food goes to waste in the supply chain, and so what we do is monitor these storage conditions is very important. And so the chicken business is huge because Chick-fil-A, there's a lot of chicken, and so the chicken has to be kept at a specific temperature range. It can only be defrosted for a certain amount of time. So there's like a whole science on the chicken, and so this is part of that supply chain, because the delivery and the movement of this chicken needs to be tracked pretty well, so people are not falling ill, right? And that's where IoT comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. See, that's the value your business gets, right? In any IoT application, one has to think, where's the value I'm going to get? For that value, what's the information that I need? For that information, what data do I need? From that data, which sensor will come from, how will I get it, where will I store it, how will I analyze it, how will I predict it, how will do my demand planning, all of that. So if one thinks it that way, I'd like to hear from our panelists' perspectives. How do your customers, in case you manufacture it, in case of Nathan, Tesla and all of that, how is that discussed at the supply chain level? What the value is being provided? Because ultimately, IoT is about data. It's not that you didn't do business before. It's not that you didn't have supply chain before. All you have now is this additional data of sensors which you are using in various things. So I'd like to hear thoughts from our panel. This additional complexity that we are adding, additional cost that we are adding, because making product smart is expensive. Making products connected is even more expensive. You have to add your chips and all of that kind of thing. How does the CFO say, yes, I'm going to invest that money and I'm going to get my return? Can you share with us any use cases that you might have?
I have a use case.
Go ahead.
Yes, so like Prakash is saying, there has to be a business case and it has to make a lot of financial sense. And while it is expensive to develop an IoT product, when you think of in a bigger picture in a business that maybe in this case that I'm going to talk about it has 70 warehouses across the country with millions of surplus intake from the government, and they are supposed to resell it. So when they came to us, they came with a spreadsheet, and we just couldn't believe it. And they were asking us to automate a spreadsheet, and I said, well, that's just stupid. And that's how the business meeting ended, because I wasn't gonna do it. And so they came back a few months later, say, okay, so how would you do it? So we integrated these barcode scanners, which are not really innovative, but then we integrated an iPad application that could read the barcodes so that they didn't have to buy barcode scanners. So actually save them money. And then that got integrated into a microservice that then talked to an ERP system called NetSuite. And so that connector, that piece that we wrote, was also servicing the mobile application. So they could see and they could track from their iPads where the product was going and in which bin it was stored and if it was shipped or not, and their whole supply chain piece of it, right? And I think that for them, that was it changed their business completely, and it made it so much better. And they grew a lot more, right? Than with spreadsheets where they're having a lot of problems. And so to me, it was kind of like very surprising to see a business that size that had not really done any like automation and invested in technology. And when they did, they were very glad they did.
Thank you, Melissa. Comments from Anu and Nathan?
I have some examples of use cases with by talking to customers with when we were implementing Control Tower with BY or currently some of the planning systems. Like Melissa just said, Excel is one of the most used application in most of supply chain companies. And don't be scared when you look at Excel, because they have complex models built on Excel even now, and they are very used to it. So coming out of Excel into technology is very difficult, and it's a culture change for most of the companies, and they're still trying to adapt to it. Coming to use case examples for how IoT is used in some of the cases, one of the major issues which we've heard from most of the customers when we were interacting with them was, again, visibility is one of the major issues. So the issue they had was they have a TMS system which tracks their shipments. They have a planning system, again, which they use for planning and all. But the planning system is updated once every week. So the data which is available for planning is not near to real-time data. It's not a real-time update. So the planning is done based on stale data. When I say stale data, it's data which is old, basically. So by the time they plan for any disruptions and they come out with a solution, the issue is already critical, mission critical, it's code red, because the time they had was lost between transferring data from one system to other system. So how IoT devices help in here is if you have a device connected to your planning system, which sends you the location of, say, for example, a shipment, and tells you that, okay, you were expecting a shipment to come in today, but it's not coming in today. It's because there's a hurricane happening in Florida, let's say, for example, and it's coming in instead of today, it's coming in a week later. So you already know the current location of your shipment because you are getting the information from your IoT device, and you are able to make a decision that it's instead of coming in today, it's coming in after a week, and you can see which other locations have the items available. So you can do a stock transfer, get the shipment in here, and deliver it to your customers so that you are on track with fulfilling your commitments to the customers, right? So it's basically giving you the information you need. And it's again, there's a lot of information which is provided from IoT devices. Like in this case, all the latitude, longitude information is provided, but you need to make sure that you're cleaning out the data regularly so that you're not overwhelmed with all the information you're getting. Keep focus on what is the use case you're trying to solve, because you get a lot of information which is not relevant for your particular use case. So you need to make sure that you're cleaning out the data correctly, and you're focused on resolving the use case and not deviate, because if you start going into all the information and start cleaning out, it's going to be a lot of work for you, and you're never going to resolve a particular issue. So focusing on a use case and taking it one step at a time is very important.
Yeah, I don't have a use case.
Can I ask you a different question, if you don't mind?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. One of the important topics that we heard about in the previous panel discussions was the issue of sustainability. By any chance, in your business, did you face any Tesla? And I can ask the same question to Manisa in 2 minutes. Sustainability, IoT and sustainability. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes. So I will say that Tesla has the benefit that everyone just kind of automatically wants to do everything sustainably, right? So it wasn't ever an uphill battle for us. But I will say that IoT enables sustainability, right? And I'll use an analogy to an airport. If Dallas didn't have an airport, how many businesses could really be there? How many global corporations could really be there? How many tourists are really going to come to Dallas, right? Very minimal. But because the city of Dallas and the area says, hey, we're going to invest in this architecture, now all of a sudden this airport has enabled this other thing where all of a sudden now you can have tourism and you can have, large corporations in the city and stuff like that. IoT enables sustainability in the sense that you can't ever improve anything unless you can measure it. And IoT is the architecture that allows you to measure anything you want. And from a sustainability perspective, you can't get more efficient. You can't reduce your electrical costs, your water consumption, anything, unless you start measuring it. And eventually humans are going to be your backlog. And so you have to incorporate IoT to get the speed that you need in order to get the improvements that you want from sustainability perspective, right? How many gallons are you using a day, right? Cool. How do you measure without IoT? I mean, you just can't. And you can't in the level of detail that you need, right? You can measure gallons out of a whole facility, but how do you know where they're coming from without, the IoT, the sensors checking every single water valve through the whole facility, how many gallons are used in each of these places. So it's the architecture.
Last comments?
I second what Nathan said. You can't manage what you can't measure. And so measuring is the core of IoT, and that becomes the baseline for ESG strategies. basically. So it could start as simple as saying we produce 30 bags of trash a day and we want to go to 20. So you don't need to have like a huge plan, but you need to have a baseline, a number, a metric. And I would say that also IoT can help with another piece of social responsibility by tracing the source of goods. If you think of cocoa beans and avocado, and making sure that they're compliant to human rights, because there is a lot of slavery around those type of things. Well, thank you.
Thank you. One question from audience. Yeah. Question from audience. You can take one.
Yeah. Let's do it. You know, which start.
I think it really caught my attention at the beginning that you're like, there are hundreds and hundreds of different sensors, and there are lots of new products and new solutions that are rolling out every week, right, or every month. So, as future leaders in supply chain, how can we prevent ourselves from getting lost in such a vast field and communicate targeted and effective solutions to our specific issue?
Did you get the question?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Anu alluded to something earlier, to not get bogged down, right? Like, there are too many, like how many, if you go to the App Store on your cell phone and you search calendar or alarm clock, you know how many there are? Too many, right? And the same thing's going to happen in every supply chain application you have, right? There's too many solutions, but that doesn't mean that you have to get lost. Find the one that matches your specific need. Really narrow in on what you need, right? Do you need IoT or do you need machine learning? If you don't have the right data, you need IoT. How can you get more data of all these IoT solutions? What's the exact one that I need, right? And that is a challenge, and it has been a challenge for centuries, since the dawn of time, is what is the correct solution and what are the requirements for the thing that I need, and that I don't think will ever go away. I think defining your requirements will be a lifelong skill, certainly not in our lifetime. Probably not in your lifetime. I'm not that much older than all of you. I'm probably younger than some of you. So, like, it's going to be a lifelong challenge, and you just have to. But that's a good skill to develop. Don't get flustered with the fact that there's so many solutions, right? Say, what do I need? Define it, and then find a solution that meets that need.
Yeah, it need not be a solution which solves all the problems as well. Majority of the problems will do, because there are again enhancements coming in all of the applications. So your issues will be resolved, and that's where the priorities come in. Identify the solutions, identify the issues, prioritize them, and fix them as you go. So,
Thank you. Last word, Melissa.
No, I second everything they said, and yeah, nothing to add. Yeah.
Thank you. So folks, IoT is a journey that's just beginning. It's a 1.1 trillion kind of a business soon. Multi-billion devices will be connected. On average, I'm sure each of you have connected devices, almost 2 per person. Smartwatch, smartphone for sure. Okay, and you are using it to your benefit without even knowing there's IoT involved, that there are sensors involved, there are embedded systems involved. Okay, so what Internet was 20 years ago, Internet of Things are going to go. Internet was for people, not things. So we are in a journey where things, people, business, data, technology are all going to be together, and soon, instead of decision support systems supporting human beings will be supporting machines. All right?
Hopefully not.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anu and Nathan. Have a great rest of your day. We're so thankful for your time today and your insight. All right, guys. Well, we will not be doing a break before last panel. So now we're going to be moving into Meet the Blockchain panel. So this will be moderated by Professor Ramesh, and we have Rashi Gajula. She's the vice chairperson for Blockchain for Energy. And she's an established leader with 22 years of upstream oil and gas IT experience and a proven track record of enabling business through technology. She leads automation and digital at Pioneer Natural Resources. And as a vice chair for Blockchain for Energy, she spearheads the oil and gas industry's digital transformation by leveraging blockchain and related technologies through development of use cases that catapult the collective journey of member companies into the new era of sustainable energy development. So please welcome Rashi Gajula. All right, and in person, we also have Shubham Tripathi, and he's a senior director at Edge Verve. He's an innovator of supply chain technology. Over the past 21 years, he's developed products and implemented solutions in supply chain technology that have helped customers increase revenue, reduce cost. And in his current role as Senior Director, Business Development at EdgeVerb, he is helping enterprises in manufacturing industry solve their supply chain partners' connectivity problems using AI and advanced automation. And in his pursuit to solve industry problems, Shubham has found incongruence with the exciting world of blockchain technology. Shubham firmly believes that blockchain-based Web3 will be bigger than the internet. So welcome, Shubham. And then joining us virtually is Sunil Sherian. He's the CEO and co-founder of Copperwire Systems. And it's a blockchain application company that enables multi-data traceability. For the past 3 years, through Copperwire Systems, Sunil has helped enterprises achieve complete traceability, integrity, and automation across their entire supply chain. Before this, he was the chairman and CEO of Mentor Global, a company that he founded 10 years ago, focusing on providing better outcomes for consulting companies in the HR area. He was a member and founding team at Array Networks and was VP of Product Marketing through IPO. So welcome, Mr. Sunil Sherian.
Thank you.
All right, Professor, take it away.
Thank you, Vanessa. I mean, it's a good introduction, and again, expert panelists here to answer our questions. I had a little bit of throat problem, so excuse me when I talk through this. So I want to give you a little bit of tidbits on the news, what you've seen recently or heard, or if you go back, like emails. We used to have emails, and then it became internet. At one point, and a lot of messaging and communication happened. Data became accessible. If you think about data, we heard about data today from all the speakers and also the panelists. The importance of data, the analytics, and all the things we do here, learning about it. So data became accessible, and then Bitcoin and blockchain. That's what we hear. Bitcoin goes back to the 2008, 2009. And then people even relate blockchain to Bitcoin, which is kind of, I mean, those are the things we want to go after. These expert panelists are going to give you some insights on the confusion that has been created on these words and what it means really. So interesting insights there. And then if you look at the internet, how the data became accessible, with blockchain, you're actually going after the truth of the data, where it came from, the authentication. So there are things related like that, which is becoming more critically important. And we've been stressing that in our discussions in classes and so on. I'll give you one final example of my own experience years ago, and then I will go to the panelists for further discussion. So I used to work for the auto industry, and this is 20 years ago, okay? So I was responsible for a prototype manufacturing plant. And we were assembling products, and it was electric power steering. We were assembling in a plant. And the product came through. It had software and hardware that was integrated into that product. So for manufacturing, these products showed up in our dock. So everybody was so excited. We were waiting, and there were so many releases for changes that happened as well, because you had to have software changes, hardware release changes, and so on. So finally, when the product showed up with all the changes incorporated by engineers, everybody was happy. The product is out there. We can start assembling it now. So when we started assembling it, we found there were certain issues. It was failing the function tests. Okay. So products, everybody blamed it on the function test stand. It was not really the function test stand, it was actually the product itself. So now the question came out to be, why did that happen, right? So what happened? This is everybody was waiting for it. The launch was going to be delayed. The chief engineer was involved. The general manager was going to get involved. So, what really happened, which really, resulted in that. So then there was so much of investigation into the emails. Disputes started happening. Everybody was starting to finger point, saying, hey, I did not do that. This was already communicated. Product engineering said it was communicated to manufacturing. Manufacturing said, they never got it on time or whatever. So it went through that whole process, and end of the day, the result was so much of friction between the departments, okay? And not only the friction, it also strained the relationship with the supplier. And we were about to fire them because we thought that they were the culprits, even though I'm not quite sure about that, because there was so many people involved in this whole process, the number of stakeholders involved in making those decisions. And it resulted in, I think I just gave you a microcosm of what happens in organizations today, especially in manufacturing. And this particular example really illustrates the frustration and disputes we have in manufacturing, and not able to track and trace the products and components and be able to authenticate where it came from and so on. That's exactly what blockchain can do for us. Just one piece of it, what I've seen as an example. So we will get into the details of the discussion here, but I thought that particular discussion was, example was value added. So let me get into, understanding blockchain. I would like to block it up into a couple of different segments. Understanding blockchain is an important aspect. So let me start with Sunil. He has years of experience, as you heard, and also is an entrepreneur. He started, maybe towards the end, he can give some advice on entrepreneurship, how he became an entrepreneur from being an engineer. So that can be really value added from that perspective. So in your words, Sunil, if you can give what blockchain means for you and how it can help supply chain now that you're launched this organization, Copperwire Systems.
Thank you, Ramesh. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. And I'll start with email because you brought that up. In 91, I was in grad school doing masters in computer science, and our networking professor was a student of Douglas Comer. So one of the examples he had was, we were talking about SMTP protocol, which is what is used for mail. So he sent a mail to all of us, Ram, Colin, God, right? And here is what you're supposed to do. It really taught all of us that data cannot be trusted, because anything that sits in a database can be manipulated by the owner of that database, right? Around the same time, there were two gentlemen, W. Scott Stornetta and Stuart Haber, who were working for Belco. They actually understood the fundamental reason, because on a computer, you can go in and change the clock. I can take a document that Dr. Ramesh created, I can put my information in it, claim that I created it 10 years back. Who's going to prove otherwise? So that fundamental problem, they solved by having multiple copies of the document, hashing it, and linking those blocks of data together. Satoshi Nakamoto came along in 2008. In his Bitcoin white paper, he references that, and he created a mechanism that even today, nobody has been able to counterfeit money that is created on a blockchain. So Bitcoin is the first use case, first application for this technology. Now we have had progress with Ethereum and smart contracts and a lot of other places. But when you start looking at multi-tier supply chains, multi-tier business networks, typically what happens is I have no visibility beyond my tier one. So Caterpillar has 10,000 suppliers. Ford has thousands of suppliers. But CAT only knows about the first 1,500 customers, suppliers. And the tier ones don't want to expose any information about tier twos, etc., because they are afraid of being compromised and privacy and pricing squeeze and other stuff. So because of that, the entire supply chain is a mess today because you look at large companies today, they're exchanging information by email, EDI. I'm sending data to you, you're going to make some changes to it, you're going to send data to somebody else. And by the time that data flows from person to person through these 5, 10 tier leaf networks, your information is maybe 3 to 6 months old. So that ship that blocks Suez Canal, that happened, let's say, yesterday. Your systems are sitting on data from 3 or 6 months back. You're going to run out of stuff. Stores will become empty. So that lack of visibility is a fundamental problem. And blockchain technology can bring that distributed trust. So fundamentally, this is about trust. I call this 50 shades of trust. What level of trust do you have when somebody is giving you data? When somebody is certifying the data, you have a little bit more trust. But if the certifier got compromised, like the cotton supply chain got compromised, now nobody trusts where the cotton comes from. You claim to be organic. How do I know it is organic? So this fundamental issue of trust is what we are trying to attempt to solve here with blockchain.
Okay, you want to add Rashi or Shubham?
I think, see, from a blockchain, so blockchain, at its root is a distributed ledger, right? We all know what a ledger is. And what happens in a blockchain is that you take a ledger and you make it secure using cryptography, right? And then you connect every block with the previous block, right? With the idea that this information then becomes universal, right? Because it is distributed. It is not controlled by one central agency, right? And we have heard today, a lot of panels talking about the data problem of supply chain. And the blockchain can solve all of these problems because what it brings to this entire thing is transparency. Anytime anyone, if that record is written on a blockchain, is now publicly available to the entire set of users of that particular blockchain, right? And that creates the kind of power and the use cases that we will talk about, which are not possible today because there is no central place where the data is there. And it creates efficiencies, which is humongous, right? Think about today, if you have a 10-level supply chains, every supplier and every customer stores the same information in their database. We can really look at how we can create that level of efficiency where you can remove all of this information and have just one single source where everything is linked together.
Okay. Very good. Okay, thank you. So we've heard the word trust. The trust is such an important element. What happens if we break that trust? Right, it's become such a big buzzword. Sunil, you have any insights on that?
So I think we can start by how we establish trust today, right? And when we say we trust a brand, what we really say is that the brand is giving us a consistent user experience, right? They make a promise, brand makes a promise. Within their execution, from engineering to product design to manufacturing to marketing, they're executing against the promise. So as long as that promise is consistently being delivered to the same standards, the brand has higher levels of trust. Now, if the moment you see there is some cheating going on, you say, hey, I can't trust this anymore, right? The quality of the trust goes away, right? So this happens in relationships, this happens in other stuff. And my wife tells my son, say, hey, you can do anything as long as I can trust what you're doing. The moment you break the trust, it'll be hard to bring it back up, right? So this is the foundation of what we're trying to do. So how do we build a trusted ecosystem? How deep do I need to go in order to make sure that I can trust the data? Did the person who put the data in, is he tampering it? Do I need to have some smart systems and AIs and cameras or satellite pictures to validate that? Should I sign that with the temperature information that's coming automatically from the environment or satellite verification at a particular latitude and longitude, right? So how do I, because digital systems today, and the reason it didn't happen is it was just too complicated to do PKI and security in the 90s. It was too hard. And we opted for convenience and speed. But where we are, we cannot trust anything. Fake news is everywhere. Right? Fake videos are there. Fake AI is there. Right? So we have to go down to the depth of understanding how trust comes in and say, how do we build that? And how do we connect the dots? So it's almost like taking that certification and trust process and building that in this distributed ecosystem. Hopefully that gives you a basis to start from.
So another aspect to the trust issue here. Why do you think it is very difficult in the businesses to increase trust? Because it's an advantage. It's an advantage to keep your secrets with you, right? I mean, you don't want to tell them how much the unit cost is because then you can have a bigger margin. And that becomes a very natural blocker to the technology we are talking about to increase trust, because it can be a competitive disadvantage. And what do you do to actually solve for that? And blockchain has been, with the new idea of sustainability and provenance, we're talking about, traceability. There is a generational difference that has come about, and why we're again talking blockchain. It hasn't, really picked up in the recent years, but now it's making a comeback. And the reason is that people are willing to pay to find out where it came from. And the generations want to have a sustainable source. So now businesses are thinking, well, there is a marketplace here. Now I can make an economic case to be more open about what I did. And if I say that I was sustainable and I did it in a very social, clean way of creating what I'm creating, then I can actually sell it and increase my margins. And that's taking that approach of wanting to be more trustworthy.
Super. I think we are all the panelists pointed to the importance of trust. When we go to a store, we buy an orange, right? And it's organic. That's what they tell you. Do you trust that? I mean, we all pay for it. Actually, you're paying more for that organic orange than the other ones. I think the example I can think of is Chris was discussing today about Volkswagen, right, with the software company. If you remember several years ago, what happened when the software was manipulated for emissions? Okay, what happened to their stock price? The company was beat up. I mean, the whole leadership team was fired, right? So there are several examples like that, and many of these data points, even the data we collect today in terms of ESG or whatever, we don't know what that data is. So we're going to get into those discussions, but at least we kind of laid the foundation for the trust and the importance of authentication of data. So let me turn to Rashi for one of her specific questions on she heads the Blockchain for Energy Consortium, which is a panel, and I'll let her explain what they do in helping companies and what exactly, how do you manage to help companies to unlock that blockchain potential with some use cases?
Sure. So one of the things also about blockchain, we talk about it being immutable, being trustworthy. Another very key aspect is that it applies to external workflows. With IoT, with AI, ML, you can actually modernize your organization within the walls of your organization. If you think about your personal self, right, you've modernized your lives. You don't write checks anymore. You Zelle, you Venmo. You don't go to grocery shops. You have a one-click delivery at home. All of these are great. In manufacturing, that's a very far-stretched dream, even now. What happens today in manufacturing is still paper. You have a delivery that comes in, writes up a paper ticket, then you have somebody go deliver it to a tech, the tech then keys it in, it goes into a database, the database then knows that, okay, we are expecting an invoice, then the invoice comes in, then it goes through approval, first level, second level, depending upon the expense, VP level, 30, 60, 70 days, the invoice has just gotten to an ERP system that is getting ready to now pay. That's how long a supply chain and a payment process actually goes through. Now, the reason we haven't been able to do this is because we are not working with our suppliers to say, okay, I have my database, you have your database, I have my IoT systems, they are measuring my deliveries that I should be getting. The supplier has their own. How do we have one industry database? And that's what blockchain is. It's a digital ledger. It's a distributed digital ledger. Every node in the blockchain has the same copy, where my database says you delivered 50 gallons, and the supplier says, yes, I have also delivered 50 gallons, and they match. And that's the use case that we are exploring with our consortium-based concept, where I could not have solved it within my company. We have to have companies come together in a consortium, say these are all our problems, and let's collectively solve it. We have collective resources, we have collective use cases, and a collective industry solution that can solve for that. It could not have been solved internally in an organization. So one of the programs that we're having is a trucking, a commodity transport, where we have instrumentation out in the field. I work for an oil and gas companies, and if you've seen the plunger lifts, I mean, they're just by themselves. There's not an office, there's not an admin sitting there monitoring what's happening on that well site. So when a truck comes in and drops in chemicals that plunging well or a Christmas tree needs, what happens is there's a flow meter, or there's a sensor that's saying, okay, I have received 60 gallons of chemicals that went down this truck, but that information does not go anywhere. It's great information, but we haven't really put it in a system somewhere that then we can have everybody validate. So that's what we're trying to do, is that have multiple parties bring in real time. I heard the last panel talk about supply chains need real time visibility. So you have a real time block on the blockchain that says, yes, we've all matched. And if that happens, then you do not need to have a paper ticket. You do not need to have an invoice. You do not have to wait 60 days. If the automation between different vendors can say, yes, this is an immutable record, it hasn't been tampered with, I can go ahead and process this for payment. So in our company, we're looking at use cases which takes 60 days to get an invoice, to get it down to 24 hours. And what does that do to your information on how much are you spending? So you have visibility into your operating expenses. Huge difference and a game changer. So that's one use case. And I know we are running short on time, so I'll just hit on another important use case on ESG. ESG stands for environmental social governance. It's a very big concept, especially with supply chain. It has huge ramifications on being able to trace where it is coming from, the authenticity of what is being done and how it's being done. One of the original use cases on blockchain was for diamonds. And the idea there was that if you can be sure that you're buying a diamond that was not a blood diamond, somebody mentioned about the slavery and the social governance of how you're sourcing your commodities, it can have a better price on the market. That's a huge deal, and even in oil and gas it is, where if I was able to have a green barrel or a green gasoline that's prevented, I can charge more. Not only that, but it also gives companies the continuity and the social awareness that's much needed in these days.
Great point. I just want to, since Rashi touched on ESG, we were doing some research on ESG recently and found that there was a Harvard Business School paper which was published, and they said, the ESG data, if companies were spending time on it, tracking environmental, social governance type data, it was considered as a negative. Back in the 2008, if you go back to those years, 2001 through, so he actually collected like 15 years of data. Okay, so 2001 through 2008, companies will say, you're collecting ESG data, that's a waste of time. We don't want to invest money in your company, right? After the financial crisis, guess what happened? It shifted 180 degrees right up there. Like now, if you don't have ESG data, they don't want to invest in your business, just like what Rashi was pointing out. So the demand is there, right? The demand is so strong that it has come in. I don't think there is any turning back. I'm sure that all the panelists here will agree with that. It's not like one of these hypes that happen once in a while and disappears. I mean, so I think it's strong. It's the momentum is huge, and you're going to see that. And when Rashi was talking about the challenges with the disputes and how long it takes, that particular example I pointed out from my prototype plant, we took 3 months with so many of the engineers' time wasted because we were going through all the emails, collecting documentation, and it didn't solve anything. We actually strained the relationship. That's all that happened. So much of wasted data. This is just one product. So you can imagine how many products companies deal with. Excellent. So let's go to Shubham now that he's our business development director here, who is selling to all the clients. And we see a lot of challenges with blockchain because many companies don't even understand it. I didn't understand it a couple of years ago. I was reading books and trying to understand. I bought a book, if you guys want to see this, The Blockchain from Harvard Business Review. It's a collection of papers. Great book. So we as faculty members are always evaluating. I keep talking to Sunil, and they all coach me on all these new technologies. So here the question is, with all these challenges of not understanding blockchain, right? As a business development director, how do you sell these things, these technologies? What is your approach to it?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we do these days is you have to really go and educate the customer about what problems can be solved with new technologies. I think that is the the job of sales is changing. I'm saying especially if you're selling any of these new technologies, because when you go and tell a client, I can do X, Y, and Z, with this technology for you. Say with blockchain, I can create a NFT for you, and that can really build an entire big community. They'll not even understand what you're talking about, because when you're especially talking to manufacturers, they are still very, very old ways of thinking and working, right? So the first thing is that you need to first make them understand what they are doing today in their lives and how you can really make changes, to that, so that it improves things, right? So for example, let me give you a very simple example. I got a requirement from one of my clients where they said that we have contractors all over the place, and they have heard about blockchain and proof of work, and so they sent a requirement before our meeting, and the requirement was like this: that we have these contractors who are doing some work on remote sites, and we are not there to validate what they're doing. So we want to use blockchain because it can help you do a proof of work of what they're doing. And the concept of proof of work in a blockchain or say from a Bitcoin, which is basically a proof of work blockchain, is very, very different, right? So they were getting confused on what proof of work is and what they would want to use. So the first thing definitely is to start on what a blockchain is, right? And what are the various use cases that they can think about. So for example, Rashi talked about diamonds. There's a blockchain, I'm not sure if you have heard, it's called VeChain. It's one of the most advanced blockchain for supply chain. And it was started by the CIO of Louis Vuitton, right? And the problem that they were trying to solve is that how I can, ensure that when I'm selling a bag to someone, that they feel that I have paid, $2,000 for a bag, which is not a counterfeit bag, right? And how do I prove it, right? So that is where, the thing is. So coming back to, the question, as a sales, the most important role right now is to understand the business of supply chain, and then think about what they can do to solve it. So for example, When we go and talk about it, one of the first things, and we heard that entire day today, right? When you talk about the tiered supplier visibility, how that can be enabled using a blockchain. That is one of the best use cases. Second, as Rashi was talking about, can we build this central database, right? The challenge there are humongous because suppliers. So we are working with a defense company, and they have a lot of these suppliers. They will not tell them how and what is the composition of the part that they are giving. Now that is very important for this company because they want to report on their ESG metrics basis of the composition, that are they using any harmful chemicals in these things. Now where blockchain is coming to rescue, because blockchain has come out with a lot of newer concepts like a zero knowledge proofs. And if you look at these kind of concepts which were not there earlier, it starts helping because now the supplier can tell you that I am not using any harmful chemical without opening up that what is the composition. And because it is on a blockchain, you can trust it, right? And a lot of these concepts are really kind of coming along. Similarly, when we are talking about one other use case today, right? When I think Pahi mentioned that about drop shipments and people trying to build their own logistics network to support. Now, if you think from a blockchain perspective, and it is a very, very good concept where you can enable a complete logistics network built up on a blockchain using NFTs and Web3 concepts where, think about today, Uber, right? Uber did a very great thing, but it's still very centralized because they control all the data. But if you have to build this in using a blockchain in a decentralized manner, where what we can do is we can use the same participants in the network, but give them ownership of that network, so that you are creating new business model without creating a cost for you. But because of the ownership, there is a trust that will come in. You can ask these guys to validate if they're picking up shipments, they can validate those shipments. So a lot of these new concept business models are possible. And that's what we do right now, because we are at that stage where businesses are not there yet. So we have to go and make them learn of what are the possibilities.
That's very interesting. Certain words are coming out very strongly from the panelists: brand, trust, pricing, right? So you heard from Sunil, about the brand, the trust part. Everybody discussed it. The pricing part, and some companies have really capitalized on it. One of the examples recently was there's a guitar manufacturer. The name of the company is Taylor Guitars. So they just found out that they were using a lot of these trees they cut from Hawaii. Okay, so to make those guitars. So they decided to actually integrate the whole, kind of vertically integrated. So they went there and actually started planting trees. For every tree they cut, they'll plant trees. So environmentally, they are protecting the system, but at the same time, they are also taking care of the planet, right? So, and in doing that, what the company realized was, first of all, they reduced waste out of the process. Okay, so they were buying it from suppliers. They will find that some of this wood is not good for making guitars, so reject it. Now they were manufacturing it, and they were actually planting these trees, so they know exactly what type of trees they need. So they have reduced waste in that process. So as they gained advantage in that sector, now they have started selling it to their competitors, because they, so this is a company that is really demonstrating how you can create that value within your organization. And if you have that ESG, not look at it as a negative, it's actually a positive experience. And you're creating a new business model out of it. Now people are going to come to you as an integrated supplier, maybe potentially, because there's no other opportunity. Because if you don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. We heard that from some other presenters this morning as well. So, so Sunil, any more thoughts on that?
I want to pick up on where Rashi left off, right? And just look at a two-party transaction, right? So I have to do a bunch of work on my side to make sure that this is acceptable to Rashi, let's say, on her business side, right? She will have people on her side do almost the same amount of work just to check and balance that everything is the same, right? If you actually start quantifying the amount of work that is duplicated between two parties, it is 15 to 20% at least. So if she and I can agree that why don't we just have one common source of truth and split the difference, we will each save a few percentage to our bottom line immediately, right? So the technology has a lot of cost advantages because we are eliminating this time lost. I'll give you an example of time loss and how that translates to money. We have a customer that is Uber for trucks. You can order trucks, 20-ton, 53-foot, cold chain capable. I wanted to go from point A to point B. Now, it's a very arcane ecosystem where the truck drivers have to be paid by the brokers upfront because they have to put up money for diesel and the drivers' daily wages and things like that, right? So they have to put up money. So the truck brokers will take these orders from big companies. The shippers will say, I have 10 loads to be taken out, 100 loads to be taken out. Now, the truck brokers always financially strapped because they have to advance money and it takes 60 to 90 days to get paid. And the reason it gets time to get paid is in order for them to invoice the customers, they have to get this physical proof of delivery. Some countries call them lorry receipts, and some other is a proof of delivery. Customer has to sign off on the delivery, and that piece of paper the truck driver puts in his pocket after his delivery, goes ahead and does a bunch more trips all over the country, comes back maybe a week later, 30 days later. Now your office takes that paper and submits it as part of an invoice. Then your 30, 60-day clock kicks in. So you have a cash cycle that takes 60 to 90 days. So what we helped them do was to take proof of pickup. So the items are scanned, pictures, videos, etc. The truck driver signs off digitally. So there's a digital application on a mobile phone that they sign off on. The journey is tracked. And then on the delivery side, the same thing happens. The condition of the shipments, the customer signs off on it. So if everything is good, we have now 3 banks who are providing immediate payments as almost like an invoice factoring solution. About $50 million has been approved to provide this financing on a trial basis. That's an example of a scalable use case which is coming from the digitalization of supply chain. And what blockchain is enabling is having that trust in the digitalized supply chain, which is a major trend. Without that trust in the technology, digitalization is going to be hits and misses here and there. So just giving you a couple of examples of how you can bring savings and new forms of revenue, because now the truck brokers can go and say, you know, you have that 100 loads, I'll take the 100 loads every day because I have a bank ready to finance me. It doesn't have to put up any money out of pocket.
Super. So I wanted to ask, since Shubham brought up proof of work, which was a topic I'm sure many students don't know what proof of work stands for from a blockchain perspective. And also there is so much of the critiques are saying, you can use blockchain, but it absorbs or takes a lot of energy. It's not environmentally friendly from that perspective. So maybe, Shubham, can you shed some light on that definition of proof of work? And
Sure. Proof of work, and I'll explain it with an example of Bitcoin so that it's easier to understand. So Bitcoin is one of the first applications, right? It's a cryptocurrency that leverage the concepts of blockchain and build this. So what happens is when you and like there's a very excellent example if you have seen of how a block is created, right? You put in an information and you put in for every information you can create a cryptographic hash SHA-256, right? And you basically have to find the nuance, right? Which is the key, which is like a random number. So typically what happens every time if I am one of the computer, say I have a computer, and if I have to find out for a particular piece of information, a valid hash code, right? I need to mine for that nuance, and that's called mining. So, that's called like the Bitcoin mining per se. So what happens is every time if you mine this, that code is then sent out to other computers, right? So say all of you are like other nodes. So if I mine something and I send that node to you, you will validate whether it is valid or not. Now, if you say that that is valid, if all the nodes here say they are really valid, that is the point in time, it is considered, yes, this block can be added to the blockchain. Now, this is like a proof of work that I did that work to find that nuance, and that's like the proof. And you guys have kind of so that's called proof of work. Kind of where what we are saying is that like a miner who is trying to mine using his network of computers, then it takes a tremendous amount of power, and that is one of the biggest challenges of Bitcoin today, where a lot of people say that it is not ESG compliant because it needs a lot of power to mine every block. And so that is proof of work. There are other, so what proof of work is essentially is a consensus mechanism, right? Where all the nodes are coming to a consensus that there was work done to before the block was added. There are other consensus mechanisms like a proof of stake, proof of authority. So different blockchains are using different consensus mechanisms. I also wanted to touch upon a very important factor because we are talking blockchain and why there are like these multiple blockchains that you'll hear out, right? It's not just one blockchain, like a Bitcoin is one network, Ethereum is another network you might have heard, Solana, VeChain, Avalanche. These are some very common L1 networks. And all of them are trying to solve one biggest problem of blockchains, which is there, which is a trilemma of, that either a blockchain can be secure, or it can be decentralized, or it can scale. Till now, everyone is trying to solve that problem on their own, but every blockchain has one challenge still, right? So if you talk about, Ethereum, the problem that they had, they just moved from proof of work to proof of stake. So they had a problem of scale, that they are not able to scale more than 10 transactions per second. And that was one of the key challenges that they were thinking that they will move. And yes, there are various other concepts of databases that are being applied, like sharding and all that are going to come up. But essentially, this consensus mechanism is very, very important for any blockchain, because that is how you will establish this important word that we have been talking about, trust, right? And every blockchain is trying. So it's a very interesting, area, especially all of you, as students, when you are thinking about it. This is where all the, I will say, the research is going on, and if you have seen, right? So we have supply chains, right? We had AI, we had automation, we spoke about IoT. Melissa today talked about, how IoT devices can help you sense the temperature of a chicken. But ultimately, all of that data will come into something like a blockchain. So it's very important for all of you to also look and understand, because this is where all the data will come. And this will solve the biggest problem that we have. Now, how do you build this database which is really trustworthy?
Super.
If I may add to what Shubham just said, one of the blockers in an organization when you go try to sell blockchain use cases is the fact that sometimes there is this baggage that the Bitcoin and the energy consumption and the cultural, people start thinking having the block against blockchain. And immediately if you change your vocabulary to say, we're talking distributed ledger technology, we're talking distributive apps, or we're talking smart contracts, you see a different, body language and interest. And it's unfortunate. I think it is unfortunate that we have been in a place where we've added stigma to a very, very foundational, very, very transformative technology. But I think that the another perspective to this is that AI and internet, these were discovered, invented maybe 50 years back. Blockchain is still a new kid on the block. It came around in 2008. So in the enterprise, when we're talking about enterprise blockchain, we're talking more permissioned. Any of the consensus conversation that you had about SHA and sharding, those are concepts that are probably not even close to be considered in the enterprise, because in the enterprise, you know the parties that you're going to interact with. and you also have a smart contract that's validating the transaction. So the consensus is more based on authority. It is not based on proof of stake. It is not based on proof of work. So those complexities completely go out when you're doing this in commercial sense. And I think that's a very important understanding that you have when you sit down with executives. You've got to make them understand.
So do
Just
you want to add?
adding a couple of points on that. I actually came to US to do a PhD in AI in 1990. It was not until 2014, 2015 when we had enough compute power, networking, storage available for cheap to be able to do AI at scale. Now you can see the transformations happen. AI is now accepted across multiple areas, voice, chat, different types of use case analytics. A lot of those things are now pretty popular. Right? Now, blockchain technology won't take that long because we're building off of that foundation. But every technology goes through an adoption curve. Like Rashi said, language is important. Distributed ledger technologies are better understood from people because people associated some of blockchain with crypto and some of the scams associated with ICOs and other stuff, right? Which is unfortunate because you have good technology, but it's being adopted differently. Now, there are some regulatory pressures that are coming in. So just touching on the environmental social governance aspect, I'll touch upon the E as well as the S. Companies are buying carbon offsets from different companies and paying hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in order to have your carbon footprint being reduced to net zero. So you'll see people committing to net zero by 2030, by 2025. Some companies like Google are ahead of the game, others are behind. So how, if your enterprise footprint is highly carbon positive, then how do you get to carbon negative or carbon neutral? You have to now invest in other people who are planting trees or taking carbon from the atmosphere, sequestering into the ground. So you have to pay them for it. So there's a marketplace being created for carbon. And we talked to some oil and energy majors who unfortunately bought some carbon credits from so-called nonprofits in Africa, but no trees were to be found, right? So how do you bring that trustability in the source of where the money is being created? Carbon credit is a form of money is being created, right? Similarly, the US just enacted the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Various kinds of modern slavery acts have come into UK, and it is common knowledge that there is a lot of labor practice violation happening, at least in this northwestern territory of China, the Uyghur Autonomous Region of China, which is responsible for 84% of Chinese cotton, which is responsible for significant amount of tomato paste. 20% of world's cotton comes from China. So if you're buying any clothing product, right, which has cotton in it, there is a 20% probability that it comes from China and 84% probability that you are actually in violation of forced labor. Now, the impact of the law is such that Customs and Border Patrol, as of June 21st, can stop any product at border unless and until, on a presumption of guilt, unless and until you can show convincing traceability and proof that you are not in violation. And in the case of tomato paste, for example, it goes down as deep as going down to the seeds that went into it. So when you have partners who are committing these crimes, and big companies are implicated, Adidas, Nike, BMW, a lot of this have been put on watch lists from companies from this. So how do they know? They are trusting the suppliers and the suppliers, etc. They don't, but honors and responsibility is on the importer record. So we're working with companies like Costco to enforce that for their customers and their vendors to prove that they're not in violation. So the ones who care to be in good business practices, they have to step up. The ones who are forcing that down, so Dr. Ram, who is our Chief Scientific Officer, says 1/3 of the companies want to be honest and will be trying to do everything possible. 1/3 of the companies are going to be cheating, regardless of what, they make their money by cheating, right? But 1/3 of them are going to be compliant because the bigger guys are asking them to become compliant. So there is a lot of people who want to have the truth, There will always be some bad apples, but if we can raise the bar for these products, the ones who are raising the bar will start forcing the other people to start complying.
Thank you, Sunil, to bring in those regulations and the pressures in the companies are facing today, because that makes it even more important that companies have to use some technology, and that kind of explains what Sunil was saying, that the adoption of this technology will accelerate faster than AI or any other technology we've seen in the past. So definitely, and also add one more point about the communication aspects to the clients when they're trying to buy blockchain. This is not new. If you look at lean, for example, years ago, companies were trying to deploy lean in manufacturing, and we used to use all the Japanese words like Kanban and Kaizen and all that. And companies hated that. They said, we don't want to do any Japanese work here, and just go. And so finally, we adopted English words like continuous improvement, or pull systems. And we never talked about that. I mean, that's exactly what Rashi was going through, explaining all these things in a different way. So you have to know how to sell it. The culture is important, but you have to sell this technology. I mean, that's so I've been shown that we are running short of time. So let me. Any other last comments, Shubham, you want to make before we close out?
I just wanted to say that this is a technology which is evolving very fast. So it's very important for all of us to also understand the entire terms, right? When you talk about NFTs, they are just not JPEGs, right? It can drive the entire economic business models based on NFTs, right? Based on accesses. You can talk about Web3, which can build communities, which can really do a lot of things in a very, very distributed manner and still do it. Smart contracts. So there are a lot of these things. It's very important for all of us to understand it and then visualize how it can solve the supply chain problems, because you guys are very fresh. You are gonna go into this thing and you will have that fresh thinking. So please understand these concepts and see how it can be applied, in this particular world to solve it.
Super. Rashi?
Things I'll say is, in your own life, the two most important things are trust and relationship. So we're solving a very difficult problem. And once you have those, you have a very good life. And I think if we are able to achieve that, business will be much more efficient and streamlined.
Thank you. Sunil?
And,
Last words?
5 years back when I got into the space, I read this article by Gartner that said by 2030, there will be $3.1 trillion of business value created using blockchain and related technologies. Right? So this technology is coming in. As people start understanding what it means, you will recognize that there is a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that is being thrown by the incumbents who would like to do it certain way, think certain way. So Bitcoin, people may say it's not ESG compliant, it's using too much energy, but you have to contrast what does it take to protect money the United States spends, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines to protect our dollar. Therefore, compared to the amount of money we spend in banking system, Federal Reserve, Regional Reserve, etc., to protect our money, versus using green energy, hydropower, near power stations, using waste energy from volcanoes, etc., Bitcoin might actually be much, much cheaper if you actually compute the cost, right? So instead of looking at the FUD, start looking at the depth of what can it do for you if you had trust. If you have trust in business relationships, how fast can you go? Can you take out speed bumps in relationships? So that's the power of this opportunity.
Excellent. So let me conclude this panel discussion by saying you heard the word trust so many times. I was listening to one of the webinars, and one of the vice panelists there said, instead of fighting for what the truth is, think about what to do with the truth. Okay, so we all fight battles, trying to find the truth, right? That's what we do. The disputes I brought in from my previous employer and all that, instead of doing that, if we can actually go after what to do with it, creating business models and opportunities, I think And we are in that position now because we have legal issues and other things, and consumers changing as well. So that concludes our discussion here, and we are going to open it up for questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And where a lot of the work has been happening is making it easy and affordable for people to use this technology, consume it like a SaaS offering, rather than get into the bowels of the technology. And these use cases have been built and are available for any price point. Okay, so it's not like this is an expensive technology.
And also one other important aspect we didn't touch upon is the whole area of supply chain financing, right? Today, if you look at the traditional world of financing, the smaller suppliers always get the difficult bargain because people still don't trust them. And with the decentralized finance playing a bigger role into it, there are projects already started where they are ready to finance these suppliers because they have the ability to take more risk. So you will see more and more some of these supply chain financing solutions which will become decentralized.
And it kind of levels the playing field. From when we went from Web 1 to Web 2, power concentrated in a handful of players, right? The Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, etc. This Web3 world will allow us to have a more equalized distribution. The tools will be available for people to monetize what they have, and collectively, we hope to be able to build this internet of value.
So do you think there will be more pressure from these big companies pushing it back somehow on this new deployment?
I mean, any new technology goes through several phases, right? First, you will have violent opposition. Then you'll have people say, you know what, it's kind of okay for this and it's okay for that. We're kind of going through that. And then eventually they will say, we have our own central bank digital currency, which is much more secure, right? So they will eventually join. So you'll see different approaches to how this technology progresses.
Super.
The other reason why it may happen more and the big companies would have to come down to the pressures of protecting their advantage will be serendipity. And that's a real thing in businesses. Sometimes when you think that the humanity is moving towards sustainability, is wanting to protect the environment, business will have to follow. And that's when it'll be the level field that Sunil is mentioning about. The business will have to rediscover, reimagine new ways of working. And that's when, when what used to be where you did not want to have trust in supply chains and visibility in supply chains, that's when it's going to change.
And just adding to that, just in looking at the crypto world, China tried to ban cryptocurrencies a few years back. Guess what happened? It moved to Japan, it moved to other countries, right? So this technology is a technology without borders. So it's hard to regulate something where you don't even know who created Bitcoin, right? So because of that, this technology will morph and adopt, and people will find ways to join this, because the fact that you can have a common source of truth and a shared ledger is very, very powerful. But people will slow it down until they can catch up and do their own stuff.
Same thing is happening with the Ripple and XRP. If you look at that as a currency, it is, the SEC and Ripple are going through a lawsuit right now, if you look at it. And they're trying to establish standards on all these stuff. It has been a long 2-year lawsuit happening. And SEC saying it's a security, and they're saying it's a currency. And if you look back, there were no protocols, and it's an evolving technology. And what happened in the meanwhile, and the company has been progressing outside of the US in developing cross-border payments and all that stuff. And they can do it much faster than any of the others can do. So as Sunil said, if we don't do it, somebody else will. And so that challenge is always there. So companies will move fast. They've realized and learned and everything from the past mistakes they've made. So we're going to see that happen more often. So Anything else we want to add to this? Okay, any other question? Maybe one last question.
Ramesh, just adding, if you recall the conference that was in Austin,
Yep.
The chairperson of Fidelity was there, right? And she said she started looking at blockchain technologies in 2014. They actually acquired $200,000 of mining equipment to actually test Bitcoin and things like that. So everybody has been looking at this technology for a few years, and they need to get their systems to catch up before they can actually allow this to move faster.
Absolutely. And we had a group project with Toyota 2 years ago. Toyota came to us, and the Toyota Financial Services worked with us. Computer science and business school came together in offering a solution to their problem. So we did a project for them on blockchain. So, all right. Thank you so much. I think that concludes our panel discussion. Let's give a Thank you, Sunil. Thanks for joining us. So,
thank you. Enjoy. Rashi, Shivam, nice meeting you.
and a whole lot of time doing that. But I just want to say a few things. I was just writing some notes as I went through. I'll just mention a few words some of the speakers said. Klaus, when he opened up today's discussion in the morning, he talked about a new normal, which is kind of interesting because we are all moving towards a new way of living, right? Whether it's sustainability, social aspects, and so on. And then we also heard from the artificial intelligence panel about unstructured data. Sustainability again came back up, and then there was so much of discussion about how you want to go forward. Picking your passion, networking. That was brought up. Hopefully, you guys all came together today. Hopefully you made friends here in this session. Met with each other. You heard from the dean this morning that we should be doing more of collaboration. He said our way we have set up our university system, we had to change in terms of research and how we should be changing that. So a lot of interesting ideas are out there, and student clubs like ASEM, I want to thank the student officers who did a fabulous job putting this together. This is amazing work. And I will tell you, they were very passionate. The idea, of course, generated from the experts here, and they said they wanted a Tech Trends conference. Okay, Shivani is right there; she was behind it, and then it was just a word saying we want a Tech Trends conference, and nobody thought about how much work goes behind it, right? There's so much of work to do this, right? We almost did the entire technology, solutions. We never knew about whether we could get any of these panelists. So we were going after, and actually all the students actually found many of these panelists themselves through LinkedIn and other sources. So I think we can do it. I think I'm so excited. You saw how much the dean was excited about this, and hopefully we can make it a regular event every year. And I was telling Shivani that she should come back again and just do it again, wherever she goes. So, and again, a few other things. Chris, think about that, how that presentation went, the autonomous trucking. That was phenomenal, right? And they all had the similar rhymes of, going after your networking, you're going, developing your passion. He also said manage up. I don't know whether you guys listen to that. Very important. I come from the industry. I'll tell you that. Everybody thinks about managing their direct reports. But if you don't manage up, you're in trouble. You better, be sensitive to your supervisors, okay? Just a warning sign. And then OEMs and everybody wants to be a software company today because of the technology that is emerging. So that is going on. So, and then, we heard autonomous supply chains, which is kind of interesting. In fact, Chris also talked about commoditizing logistics. I was so excited to hear that. He was saying that you can buy $20,000 of autonomous supply chains. That's kind of interesting, Again, new business opportunities, where people can capitalize on. So, so he said winning is getting to where the puck is going to be next. So hopefully you guys got your focus on that. And maybe some of these technologies can create entrepreneurs like Sunil, who was here a minute ago, right? So he was an engineer and he moved into starting his own company. He has actually built and sold companies already in California. We can do that here too. We have the Blackstone Launchpad. We have the Capital Factory here in Dallas-Fort Worth. So if any of you are interested in taking any of these ideas forward, there's a whole lot of help you can get from the community here. So we are no way behind, Stanford or anything like that. We have the resources, but you have to look outside and talk to people. And Dallas-Fort Worth is an excellent community to do all of that, okay? So with that, thank you to all the panel speakers who came in, all of you students who has been patiently waiting, listening to all the discussions and asking very good questions. And thank you everybody and have a good evening.